A woman framed for murder. A ledger that holds the truth. A frontier town hiding darker secrets than she ever imagined. Clara Bennett thought escaping Kansas City would save her life. But Silver Bend, a dusty town on the edge of nowhere, may be where her past finally catches up. Between a charming con man, a brooding cowboy with his own demons, and a powerful rancher trafficking in human lives, Clara must choose. Keep running or stand and fight for the only place that's ever felt like home. Stay until the end to see how one woman's courage changes everything. And comment your city below so I can see how far Clara's story travels. The stagecoach lurched violently as the wheels hit another rut in the mountain road, throwing Clara Bennett hard against the wooden side panel. Her fingers tightened instinctively around the leather satchel pressed against her ribs, the one containing the ledger that was either her salvation or her death warrant. Outside the rattling windows, the autumn night pressed in like black velvet, the moon hidden behind clouds thick enough to choke on. She'd been traveling for 3 days straight, ever since she'd slipped out of Kansas City in the dead of night with nothing but the clothes on her back and the damning evidence of Harrison Montgomery's crimes tucked inside that satchel. 3 days of looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, trusting no one. 3 days of remembering her sister Margaret's broken body at the bottom of those warehouse stairs, and the cold smile on Montgomery's face when he'd told the police that Clara, sweet, reliable Clara, who'd never hurt a soul, had pushed her own sister to her death in a fit of jealous rage. The lie had been perfect. Montgomery had made sure of that. Witnesses who swore they'd heard Clara threatening Margaret. A motive manufactured from whole cloth, some nonsense about a man they'd both wanted, about sibling rivalry turned deadly. The police had believed every word. Why wouldn't they? Harrison Montgomery was a respected banker, a pillar of Kansas City society. Clara Bennett was just a seamstress, a nobody with calloused fingers and dreams too big for her station. But Montgomery had made one mistake. He'd underestimated Margaret's cleverness. Before he'd killed her, Margaret had managed to copy his private ledgers, the ones that showed every dirty deal, every politician on his payroll, every woman and child he'd trafficked through his charitable organizations. She'd hidden the evidence and left Clara a coded message in her final letter, one only the two sisters would understand. A childhood rhyme about a robin's nest in the eaves of their old home. Clara had found the ledger the night before the police came to arrest her. She'd run, and she'd been running ever since. The stagecoach driver's shout cut through her dark thoughts. "Riders approaching! Hold on!" Clara's heart seized. She pressed her face to the grimy window, trying to see through the darkness. There, shadows moving fast along the ridgeline, keeping pace with the stagecoach. 4, maybe 5 riders. Too deliberate to be a coincidence, too coordinated to be anything but trouble. "It's him," she whispered, though there was no one to hear. Montgomery had found her. Somehow, despite all her precautions, all her careful covering of tracks, he'd found her. The driver cracked his whip, urging the horses faster. The stagecoach picked up speed, careening around a curve that brought them perilously close to the edge of the mountain road. Clara could hear the other passengers now, a portly merchant and his wife, a young prospector with more hope than sense, an older woman who'd kept her rosary clutched in her hands for the entire journey. The merchant's wife was praying aloud, her voice high and thin with terror. "O Lord, protect us! Shield us from evil! Let us see another sunrise!" Her prayers were cut short by the crack of gunfire. The bullet shattered the window next to Clara's head, showering her with glass. She threw herself to the floor of the coach, the satchel crushed beneath her, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. More shots followed, a rapid staccato that echoed off the mountain walls. The horses screamed, the driver cursed, and then everything happened at once. One of the lead horses went down, tangled in the traces. The stagecoach pitched forward, the sudden deceleration throwing passengers like rag dolls. Clara felt herself lifted, weightless for a horrible moment. And then she was tumbling, rolling, the world a chaotic blur of darkness and pain and splintering wood. The stagecoach left the road. For a few eternal seconds, they were airborne, suspended in that terrible space between earth and oblivion. Clara had time to think of Margaret, of her mother who died when they were small, of all the things she'd never done and never would do. Then gravity remembered them, and they plummeted into the ravine. The impact drove the breath from Clara's lungs. The stagecoach hit the slope and began to tumble, end over end, breaking apart with each bone-jarring roll. Clara was thrown clear on the second revolution, her body striking the rocky ground with enough force to make the world go white at the edges. She slid, rolled, fetched up hard against a boulder that knocked what little air she had left right out of her. For a long moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only lie there in the darkness and listen to the horrible sounds of the stagecoach continuing its descent without her. The screams of the passengers, the shriek of tearing metal and shattering wood. And then, finally, the sickening crash as it reached the bottom of the ravine. Silence fell, broken only by the moan of the wind through the canyon and the distant sound of horses on the road above. Clara forced her eyes open. Everything hurt. Her left arm was twisted beneath her at an angle that promised colorful bruises, if nothing worse. Her ribs screamed with each shallow breath. But she was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was alive. And the satchel, thank God, the satchel was still strapped across her body, the strap digging into her shoulder where it had held fast through the nightmare tumble down the mountainside. Above her, on the road she could no longer see, voices called out, men's voices, hard and purposeful. Montgomery's men, hunting through the wreckage for her body, for the ledger. "Find her!" The voice carried clearly in the night air, flat and cold. "Montgomery wants proof she's dead, and he wants that book." Clara bit down on her lip to keep from making a sound. Every instinct screamed at her to stay still, to play dead, to hope they wouldn't find her in the darkness. But she could hear them starting down the slope, could hear the rattle of loose stones under their boots. They were coming. And when they found her, they'd finish what the fall had started. She couldn't stay here. Moving was agony. Every muscle protested. Every joint complained, but Clara forced herself first to her hands and knees, then to her feet. The world swayed dangerously, and for a horrible moment she thought she might pass out. She grabbed the boulder she'd struck, steadying herself, waiting for the dizziness to pass. When her vision cleared, she could see the wreckage of the stagecoach at the bottom of the ravine, a broken skeleton of wood and metal. No movement, no sounds. The other passengers, the merchant and his praying wife, the young prospector, the woman with the rosary, they were gone. Dead, or soon to be if Montgomery's men found them alive. Guilt twisted in Clara's gut, sharp and bitter. They died because of her, because she'd been on that stagecoach, because Montgomery had sent his killers after her, because she'd been foolish enough to think she could outrun a man with unlimited money and no conscience. "Over here! I see something!" The shout from above galvanized Clara into motion. She turned away from the wreckage and stumbled deeper into the ravine, away from the road, away from the voices and the certain death they promised. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, loose rocks that turned under her feet, hidden crevices that nearly swallowed her ankle, branches that whipped at her face and tore at her clothes. She fell twice, got up both times, kept moving. Behind her, she could hear the pursuit. They were faster than her, unburdened by injury and terror, but the darkness was her ally. They had to be careful, had to check every shadow, every hollow where a body might have landed. It bought her time. Not much, but maybe enough. The ravine narrowed, became a proper canyon with walls of stone rising on either side. A stream cut through the bottom, swollen with autumn rains. Clara splashed into it without hesitation, gasping at the shock of cold water that soaked through her boots and skirts. She followed it downstream, hoping the water would hide her tracks, praying it would lead somewhere, anywhere but here. How long she stumbled through that freezing stream, she couldn't say. Time lost meaning, became nothing but the next step, the next breath, the next moment of not being caught. Her teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. Her fingers had gone numb, her feet were blocks of ice, but she kept moving because the alternative was unthinkable. The voices behind her grew fainter, confused. They were losing her trail. Thank God they were losing her trail. And then, just when her legs were about to give out completely, the canyon walls fell away and the stream emptied into a wider valley. In the distance, barely visible in the pre-dawn light that was just beginning to gray the eastern sky, Clara could see the scattered lights of a town. Silver Bend. It had to be. The last stop on the stage line before the territories, the end of civilization, and the beginning of the frontier proper. She'd been heading there anyway, hoping to disappear into the rough chaos of a mining town where one more anonymous face wouldn't be noticed, where she could find work, any work, and build a new life under a new name, while she figured out how to use the ledger to clear her name without getting killed in the process. She just had to reach it. Clara dragged herself out of the stream and began walking toward those distant lights. Every step was an exercise in will over body. Her wet clothes clung to her, stealing what little warmth she had left. Her injuries throbbed in time with her heartbeat. The satchel with the ledger seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, but she held it close, protecting it even as exhaustion and cold threatened to pull her down into the mud and keep her there. The sun was fully up by the time she reached the outskirts of Silver Bend, painting the world in shades of gold and amber that seemed to mock her misery. The town was bigger than she'd expected, more established. Not just a mining camp, but a real settlement, with proper buildings lining a main street, houses spreading out on either side, even what looked like a church steeple rising above the other structures. Clara stumbled into town looking like death's own messenger. Her dress was torn and filthy. Her hair had come completely loose from its pins, and she was fairly certain she was bleeding from at least 3 different places. The few early risers who were already about, a shopkeeper sweeping his stoop, a boy delivering milk, stopped and stared at the apparition she made. She needed help, needed warmth, shelter, medical attention, needed safety, at least for a few hours while she figured out her next move. But who could she trust? Montgomery's reach was long, and his money could buy loyalty in any town. She couldn't just approach the sheriff, couldn't risk official attention that might lead to questions she couldn't answer. Clara's eyes swept the street, looking for something, anything that might offer sanctuary. There, a cafe. The Mountain View, according to the sign, with smoke rising from its chimney and the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifting through the early morning air. Ordinary, anonymous, a place where a desperate woman might beg a cup of coffee and warm herself by the stove without attracting too much notice. She made it 3 steps toward the cafe before her legs finally gave out. Clara felt herself falling, watched the ground rush up to meet her, and couldn't even raise her hands to break her fall. This is it, she thought distantly. This is how it ends. Not killed by Montgomery's men, but by cold and exhaustion in a nameless street in a nameless town. But the ground never came. Strong hands caught her under the arms, steadying her, holding her upright when she had no strength left to stand. Clara looked up into the face of her rescuer and found herself staring at the coldest pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore the rough clothes of a ranch hand, denim trousers, a work shirt, a vest that had seen better days. But there was something in the way he held himself that suggested he was used to giving orders rather than taking them. And those eyes, Lord, those eyes were like chips of winter sky, hard and assessing and completely devoid of sympathy. "Let me go," Clara managed, her voice a raspy whisper. The man's eyes narrowed. "You'll fall flat on your face if I do. That's my concern, not yours." "Maybe so." His grip didn't loosen. "But you're blocking the street, and I've got business to attend to. So either you stand on your own, or I'm hauling you to Doc Brennan's and letting him sort out what's wrong with you." Clara tried to pull away, but her body betrayed her, swaying dangerously. The man made an impatient sound and simply swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. The satchel pressed between them, and Clara clutched it instinctively, even as she struggled weakly against his hold. "Put me down," she demanded, but it came out more plea than command. "Doc Brennan's is 2 streets over," the man said, completely ignoring her protests. "You can argue with me, or you can save your strength. Your choice." Clara wanted to keep fighting, but the warmth of his body after the hours of cold, the security of being held when she'd been certain she'd die alone in the street, it was too much. Her resistance crumbled and she sagged against his chest, hating herself for the weakness but unable to fight it. "What happened to you?" The question was gruff, almost reluctant, as if he didn't really want to know but felt obligated to ask. "Stagecoach accident." The lie came automatically. "In the mountains, last night." She felt rather than saw his disbelief. "You walked all the way from the mountain pass? In your condition?" "I had motivation," Clara closed her eyes, exhausted beyond measure, and nowhere else to go. He made a non-committal sound and kept walking. Clara let herself drift, not quite sleeping, but not fully conscious either, aware of the rhythm of his steps, the steady beat of his heart against her ear, the way people stopped and stared as he carried her through the early morning streets. They reached a neat white house with a shingle out front declaring it the office of Dr. Robert Brennan, physician and surgeon. The man carrying her kicked the door rather than knock, and a moment later it swung open to reveal a silver-haired gentleman in shirt sleeves and spectacles. "Ethan Westlake," the doctor said, his tone suggesting this was not a welcome surprise. "What have you brought me this time?" "Found her in the street. Says she was in the stagecoach accident up in the pass last night." The man, Ethan, carried Clara past the doctor into a clean, spare examination room and deposited her on a padded table with surprising gentleness. Dr. Brennan was already moving, professional instincts taking over. "The stage from Kansas City? Good Lord, we heard it never arrived. They were about to send a search party." His hands were gentle as he began examining her, checking her pupils, feeling for broken bones. "What's your name, young lady?" Clara's mind raced. She couldn't use her real name, not now, not when Montgomery's men might already be asking questions in town. "Clara," she said, keeping her first name because it would be easier to remember. "Clara Hartley." The surname of her mother's family, one Montgomery wouldn't know to look for. "Well, Miss Hartley, you're remarkably lucky to be alive. Can you tell me if you're hurt anywhere specifically?" She gave him a quick inventory. The twisted arm, the screaming ribs, the various cuts and bruises. He worked efficiently, determining that while she was badly battered, nothing appeared to be broken. The ribs were likely bruised, not cracked. The cuts would need cleaning and bandaging. The cold and exhaustion were the biggest concerns. Through it all, Ethan Westlake stood by the door, arms crossed, watching with those unsettling blue eyes. Clara tried to ignore him, but it was like trying to ignore a wolf watching from the tree line. Impossible and inadvisable. "The others," Dr. Brennan said gently as he cleaned a particularly nasty cut on her forehead. "The other passengers, did..." Clara shook her head, the grief she'd been holding at bay threatening to overwhelm her. "I don't know. I was thrown clear early. I heard the crash, but I couldn't go back." It was the truth, if not all of it. She couldn't tell him about Montgomery's men, about why she'd run instead of trying to help. Couldn't explain that going back would have meant death for her, and no help for them. The doctor patted her shoulder kindly. "You did what you had to do to survive. No one could ask more than that." He stepped back, surveying his work. "You're going to be sore for weeks, and those ribs will pain you something fierce, but you'll heal. What you need now is rest, warmth, and food. Do you have somewhere to stay? Family in town?" Clara clutched the satchel tighter. No family. I was coming to Silver Bend to look for work." Another lie built on a grain of truth. "I'm a seamstress by trade. I thought there might be opportunities here." "There might be, at that, Doctor." Brennan glanced at Ethan. "She'll need a place to recover for a few days. The boarding house, maybe?" "Mrs. Patterson has a soft heart." "Mrs. Patterson's place burned down 2 months ago," Ethan said flatly. "She's living with her daughter in Denver now." "Oh, that's right. Well then, perhaps—" "I don't need charity," Clara interrupted, pushing herself upright despite the way it made her head swim. "I can work for my keep. The cafe I saw, the mountain view, surely they need kitchen help, or—" "You need to rest, not work," Dr. Brennan said firmly. "I need to earn my way." Clara swung her legs off the table, gritting her teeth against the pain. "I won't be beholden to anyone." Ethan made a sound that might have been amusement or disgust. She couldn't tell which. "Prideful thing, aren't you?" "Practical," Clara shot back, meeting those cold eyes directly for the first time. "I've learned not to trust charity. It always comes with strings attached." Something flickered in Ethan's expression. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. "Smart," he said, "but stupid to push yourself when you can barely stand. Doc's right. You need a few days to heal before you'll be any use to anyone." "I can't afford a few days." The words came out more desperate than Clara intended. She had maybe $12 to her name, the last of the money she'd scraped together before fleeing Kansas City. Not nearly enough to pay for a room and meals while she recovered, even in a rough frontier town. The two men exchanged a look. Dr. Brennan sighed. Ethan, you've got that attic room at your place, the one you've been meaning to rent out. That's not... Ethan's jaw tightened. No, absolutely not. You were just saying last week you needed the extra income. I don't need it badly enough to... He stopped, his eyes cutting to Clara and then away. It's not appropriate. A single woman, living alone with a single man, in this town. The gossip alone would... Oh, for heaven's sake. Dr. Brennan waved a dismissive hand. You're a ranch foreman, not a rake. And she's injured and desperate. Anyone with eyes can see there's nothing improper about offering temporary shelter to someone in need. Besides, Mrs. Chen lives right next door. She'll serve as a perfectly adequate chaperone, whether she means to or not. Ethan looked like he'd swallowed something sour. His eyes found Clara again, and she met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away even though part of her wanted to curl up and hide from that penetrating stare. Fine, he said at last, the word dragged out reluctantly. But it's temporary. A week, maybe 2, just until she's healed enough to work, and she pays rent as soon as she's able. I'll pay you back for every day, Clara promised. With interest, if you want it. I don't take charity, Mr. Westlake. His laugh was short and sharp, devoid of humor. I'm beginning to see that, Miss Hartley. He jerked his chin toward the door. Come on, then. My place is a few blocks over. Can you walk, or do I need to carry you again? Clara slid off the table, steadying herself against it until the dizziness passed. I can walk. She managed 3 steps before her legs buckled. Ethan caught her again, this time with resignation rather than surprise. Stubborn fool, he muttered, but he didn't put her down. Instead, he adjusted his grip and headed for the door. Doc, put this on my account. I'll settle up with you next week. See that you do. And Ethan? Dr. Brennan's voice stopped them at the threshold. Be kind. She's been through enough. Ethan didn't answer, just carried Clara out into the morning sunshine. She wanted to protest, to demand he put her down, to assert some control over a situation that had spiraled completely beyond her grasp. But the truth was, she couldn't walk, could barely think, could only hold tight to the satchel with the ledger and pray that Ethan Westlake, this cold-eyed stranger with the reluctant charity, wasn't another kind of danger entirely. They walked in silence through streets that were waking up, shops opening their doors, people beginning their daily routines. Clara could feel the stares, could almost hear the whispers that would be circulating by noon. The mysterious woman Ethan Westlake carried through town, the stagecoach survivor, the stranger with secrets in her eyes. Let them talk. She'd survived Montgomery, survived the crash, survived the night. She could survive gossip. Ethan's house was small but well kept, a simple structure on the edge of town with a view of the mountains where she'd nearly died. He carried her inside and up a narrow staircase to an attic room that was sparse but clean. A bed, a washstand, a chair, a small window that let in the morning light. He set her down on the bed with the same impersonal care he might show a sack of grain. Blankets in the chest, water in the pitcher, privies out back. Meals are at sunrise, noon, and sunset. If you're late, you don't eat. I don't keep a maid, so you'll be responsible for cleaning up after yourself once you're able. Thank you, Clara said, meaning it despite his cold delivery. Ethan paused at the door, his hand on the frame, not quite looking at her. I don't know what you're running from, Miss Hartley, and I don't want to know. But this is a small town, and secrets have a way of coming out. Whatever trouble you've brought with you, keep it away from my door. Understand? Clara's blood went cold. I'm not running from anything. Right. The disbelief in his voice was palpable. The stagecoach accident. Nothing more. Just a seamstress looking for work who happened to survive a crash that killed everyone else and then walked through the mountains all night in the freezing cold. He finally looked at her, and Clara saw something in those winter blue eyes that might have been pity or might have been contempt. I wasn't born yesterday, Miss Hartley. I know a runner when I see one. If you think I'm such a problem, why did you agree to help me? Because Doc Brennan asked, and I owe him. Because you looked half dead in the street, and I'm not so far gone I can ignore that. Because... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter. You've got a week to heal and find other accommodations. Use it well. He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the stairs. A moment later, she heard the front door close, and then silence settled over the little attic room like a blanket. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching the satchel, and let herself shake. Let herself feel the terror and relief and bone-deep exhaustion she'd been holding back since the first gunshot shattered the stagecoach window. Let herself cry for the passengers who'd died because of her, for Margaret who'd died trying to protect her, for the life she'd lost and the uncertain future that stretched ahead. When the tears finally stopped, she carefully opened the satchel and pulled out the ledger. Its pages were still intact, the careful columns of figures and names still legible. This small book held the power to destroy Harrison Montgomery, to clear her name, to bring justice for Margaret and all the others he'd hurt. But it also made her a target. And now she'd brought that danger to Silver Bend, to Dr. Brennan, who'd been kind to her, to Ethan Westlake, who'd helped her despite his better judgment. Clara pressed the ledger to her chest and stared out the small window at the mountains where she'd nearly died. Somewhere out there, Montgomery's men were searching for her body, for this book. They wouldn't find her remains in the wreckage, which meant they'd know she was alive. They'd expand their search. They'd come to Silver Bend eventually. She had a week, Ethan had said, a week to heal, to find work, to establish herself in this frontier town, a week to figure out how to survive what was coming. Clara tucked the ledger under the mattress, lay down on the bed fully clothed, and closed her eyes. Sleep came hard and brought nightmares, the fall, the crash, Montgomery's cold smile, Margaret's broken body. But beneath the nightmares was a deeper current of determination. She hadn't come this far to give up now, hadn't survived the impossible to surrender to the inevitable. Silver Bend might be the end of the line, the edge of civilization, a town small enough to hold her secrets and large enough to hide her. Or it might be the place where she finally stopped running and started fighting back. Only time would tell. When Clara woke, the sun was setting, painting the room in shades of gold and crimson. Her body felt like one giant bruise, but the sleep had done her good. Her mind was clearer, the panic that had driven her through the mountains finally receding enough to let her think. She pushed herself upright, biting back a groan at the protest of her ribs, and made her way to the washstand. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror was almost unrecognizable. Bruised, scratched, her hair a tangled mess, but her eyes were still her own, still determined. Clara cleaned up as best she could with the cold water in the pitcher, wincing at every movement. She'd need new clothes eventually. The dress she'd worn through her ordeal was beyond saving, torn and filthy and stained with blood and creek water. But that could wait. Everything could wait until she was stronger. Downstairs, she heard movement. Ethan was home, moving around the kitchen. The smell of cooking food drifted up. Something simple, beans maybe, and bread. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten in over a day. Clara made her way carefully down the narrow stairs, holding tight to the rail. The kitchen was small and neat, everything in its place, the table set for one. Ethan stood at the stove, his back to her, stirring a pot. "You're up," he said without turning around. "Thought you'd sleep through till morning." The smell of food woke me. "There's enough for two. Sit." It wasn't quite an invitation, more a grudging acknowledgement of hospitality owed. Clara sat, easing herself into the chair carefully. Ethan brought the pot to the table, beans, as she'd guessed, with bacon and onions. He fetched 2 bowls, 2 spoons, a plate of cornbread that looked slightly burned around the edges. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The food was simple but good, and Clara was hungry enough that it tasted like a feast. She forced herself to eat slowly, not wanting to make herself sick. "Thank you," she said finally, "for this, for the room, for everything." Ethan shrugged. "Like I said, I owe the doc, and I needed to rent that room anyway. You're just solving a problem for me. Still, you didn't have to help." "Didn't have to. Did it anyway." He met her eyes across the table. "That doesn't make us friends, Miss Hartley. Doesn't mean I trust you or that I want to know your story. It just means I'm not the kind of man who leaves people to die in the street when I can prevent it." "I understand." "Do you?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Because you've got the look of someone who's used to relying on herself. Who doesn't trust easily, if at all. Someone who's been hurt, maybe betrayed. That's fine. That's your business. But if you're staying under my roof, even temporarily, there are rules. You mentioned them. Clean up after myself, be on time for meals. That's the easy stuff. Here's the hard part. You keep your problems to yourself. You don't bring the law to my door. You don't bring violence. You don't bring whatever demons are chasing you into my life. You're a tenant, nothing more. I don't owe you protection. I don't owe you loyalty. And I sure as hell don't owe you friendship. Are we clear? Clara absorbed the coldness of his words, the deliberate distance he was establishing. Part of her bristled at it. She'd been through hell, and this man couldn't spare an ounce of warmth or compassion. But another part understood. He was protecting himself, drawing boundaries, making sure she knew exactly where she stood. And honestly, she preferred it. Preferred cold honesty to false kindness. Preferred knowing the rules to guessing at them. Crystal clear, Mr. Westlake. Ethan, if we're living under the same roof, might as well drop the formality. Then call me Clara. He nodded once, then returned to his meal. The silence that fell this time was less awkward, more settled. An understanding reached, terms accepted. When the meal was finished, Clara stood to help with the dishes despite the way her ribs protested. Ethan looked like he wanted to object, then shrugged and let her. They worked side by side at the wash basin, him washing, her drying, neither speaking. It was strange, this domestic scene, almost peaceful. Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd felt even a moment of peace. Before Margaret's death, certainly. Before she'd discovered the truth about Montgomery. Before her whole world had collapsed and forced her to run. Tomorrow, Ethan said as he dried his hands, I'll take you to the Mountain View Cafe. Owner's name is Frank Walsh. He's usually looking for help, and he doesn't ask too many questions about where people come from. If you're serious about working, he'll give you a chance. I'm serious. Then be ready at dawn. And Clara? He paused, his expression unreadable. When people ask about the stagecoach, stick to the simple story. You were traveling to Silver Bend for work. There was an accident. You survived. The less you elaborate, the less chance you have of tripping yourself up. She stared at him, her heart suddenly racing. Why would you say that? Because I've been where you are. Running from something, trying to disappear, building a new life from pieces of the old. His eyes held hers, and for the first time she saw something other than coldness there, recognition, maybe even kinship. I know what it looks like because I've lived it. So do yourself a favor and keep the lies simple. Complex lies fall apart. Simple ones can last forever. He left her standing in the kitchen, climbing the stairs to what she assumed was his own room. Clara stood there for a long moment, processing his words, the unexpected understanding in them. Ethan Westlake was running too. Or had been. From what, she couldn't guess. But it explained the cold distance, the harsh boundaries, the careful isolation. He'd built walls around himself, and he had no intention of letting her scale them. That was fine. She didn't need his friendship or his trust. She needed a roof over her head, a job, and time to figure out her next move. Clara climbed the stairs back to her attic room, every step an exercise in endurance. She checked that the ledger was still hidden under the mattress, then settled onto the bed, staring up at the sloped ceiling. Tomorrow she'd start building her new life. Clara Hartley, seamstress turned cook, just another anonymous soul trying to make her way in a frontier town. No past worth mentioning, no secrets worth uncovering. She'd wear the mask so well that even Montgomery's men wouldn't recognize her if they came looking. And if Ethan Westlake suspected she was more than she seemed, well, he'd made it clear he didn't want to know. His willful ignorance was her shield, and she'd take shelter behind it for as long as she could. Outside her window, the mountains where she'd nearly died stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, danger was hunting her. But for tonight, in this small attic room in a stranger's house at the edge of nowhere, Clara was safe. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, she would rest. And when the time came to face whatever darkness followed her to Silver Bend, she'd be ready. She had to be. Her life, and the lives of everyone connected to the truth in that ledger, depended on it. Dawn came too early and too bright, spilling through the small attic window like an unwelcome intruder. Clara woke to the sound of movement downstairs. Boots on wooden floors, the clatter of pots, the smell of coffee strong enough to raise the dead. Her body protested every movement as she forced herself upright, the night's rest having done little to ease the deep ache in her bones. She dressed in the same ruined clothes from yesterday, wincing at how they hung on her frame, stiff with dried mud and blood. It would have to do until she could afford something better. The ledger went back into the satchel, which she tucked carefully under the loose floorboard she'd discovered last night. Not the most creative hiding place, but better than leaving it out in the open. Ethan was already seated at the table when she made her way downstairs, a cup of coffee in his hands and 2 plates of eggs and toast waiting. He glanced at her, his eyes taking in her appearance with a flicker of something that might have been disapproval or pity before his expression closed off again. "You look like hell," he said flatly. "Good morning to you too." Clara eased herself into the chair, trying not to show how much it hurt. "There's coffee in the pot. Help yourself." He returned his attention to his breakfast, cutting his eggs with precise movements. "We leave in 20 minutes. Walsh opens the cafe at 6, and he'll want to talk to you before the morning rush." Clara poured herself coffee with shaking hands, the hot, bitter liquid a blessing despite the way it scalded her tongue. "What should I tell him? About where I'm from?" "As little as possible. You're from back east. You came west looking for opportunities. The stagecoach crashed and you lost everything. He doesn't need to know more than that, and he won't ask. Frank's good people, but he's got his own troubles. He won't pry into yours as long as you can do the work." "What kind of troubles?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "The kind that aren't any of your business." He stood, carrying his empty plate to the wash basin. "Finish eating. We're leaving in 15 minutes now." The walk to the Mountain View Cafe was mercifully short, though every step jarred Clara's bruised body. The town was waking up around them. Shopkeepers sweeping stoops, a freight wagon rumbling past loaded with supplies, a woman hanging laundry in the early morning light. Normal life, ordinary routines, the kind of peaceful existence Clara hadn't known in months. The cafe sat on the corner of Main Street and 2nd, a squat building with cheerful yellow curtains in the windows and a hand-painted sign that had seen better days. Through the glass, Claire could see a stocky man with graying hair moving between tables, setting out napkins and silverware with practiced efficiency. Ethan pushed open the door, the bell above it jangling loudly. The man looked up, and his weathered face split into a genuine smile that transformed him from tired to welcoming in an instant. "Ethan Westlake, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in here for breakfast in 2 weeks. Finally got tired of your own cooking?" The man's eyes shifted to Clara, curiosity replacing the easy warmth. "And who's this you've brought me?" "Frank Walsh. Meet Clara Hartley. She's the survivor from the stagecoach crash up in the mountains." Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. "She's looking for work, and I told her you might have a position available." Frank's expression shifted immediately to concern. "Lord have mercy, you're the one who walked out of those mountains? We sent a search party yesterday afternoon. They found the wreckage, found the bodies, but no sign of you. Thought maybe you'd been thrown clear and animals had—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Never mind that. You're here and you're alive. That's what matters." "I need work, Mr. Walsh," Clara said, cutting through the sympathy before it could take root. "I can cook, I can clean, I can serve tables. I lost everything in the crash and I need to earn my keep." Frank studied her for a long moment, his eyes sharp despite the kindness in them. "You're hurt, can barely stand by the look of you. I can work through it. I'm sure you can. Question is whether you should." He glanced at Ethan. "Doc Brennan seen her?" "Yesterday. Says she needs rest, but she's too stubborn to take it." "Stubborn's good in this business. Keeps you going when the rush hits and your feet feel like they're going to fall off." Frank wiped his hands on his apron. "Tell you what, Miss Hartley. I'll give you a trial run. You work the kitchen for a week, prep work, washing dishes, helping my cook with the simple stuff. If you can manage that without collapsing, we'll talk about adding table service. Pays $4 a week to start, plus meals while you're working. That sound fair?" $4 a week. It wasn't much, but it was something. Enough to pay Ethan rent and still have a little left over. Enough to survive while she figured out her next move. "More than fair, Mr. Walsh. Thank you." "Frank." "Everyone calls me Frank." He pulled out a chair. "Sit down before you fall down. Ethan, get the lady some proper coffee and some of yesterday's cinnamon rolls. We've got half an hour before the rush, and I want to know what you can actually do in a kitchen." Ethan moved behind the counter with a familiarity that suggested he'd done it before, returning moments later with coffee and a plate of pastries that made Clara's mouth water. Frank settled into the chair across from her, his expression turning serious. "Now then," he said quietly, his voice low enough that Ethan, now standing by the door with his arms crossed, wouldn't hear clearly. I don't know what you're running from, and I don't particularly care. Half the people in Silver Bend came here to escape something: debts, bad marriages, the law, heartbreak. This town's built on second chances and fresh starts. But I need to know one thing, and I need you to answer me honest. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. What's that? Is whatever you're running from going to bring danger to my door, to my customers, to this town? His eyes were kind, but unyielding. Because I've got people depending on me, Miss Hartley. I've got a cook who's supporting 3 kids on her own. I've got regulars who come here because it's safe and warm and no one bothers them. If you're going to shatter that peace, I need to know now. The lie rose easily to Clara's lips. The same lie she'd told Ethan, told Dr. Brennan, the simple story of the stagecoach and nothing more. But something in Frank's eyes stopped her. Not the whole truth, but enough of it to ease her conscience. I don't know, she said finally. I hope not. I pray not. But I can't promise you absolute safety, because I don't know if the past will stay buried or come looking. She met his gaze steadily. If it does come, I'll leave. I won't let anyone else get hurt because of me. Frank was quiet for a moment, weighing her words. Then he nodded slowly. That's honest, at least. I appreciate that. He stood, brushing crumbs from his apron. All right then, Miss Hartley, let's see what you can do with a knife and a cutting board. Ethan, you can head out. I'll see she gets back to your place safely when the lunch rush is over. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but he just gave a curt nod. Clara, Frank. And then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him, leaving Clara alone with her new employer and the weight of partial truths. The morning passed in a blur of activity that was both exhausting and mercifully distracting. Frank's cook, a formidable woman named Marie who had arms like a blacksmith and a laugh that could shake the rafters, put Clara to work peeling potatoes, chopping vegetables, and learning the rhythm of the kitchen. The work was hard, made harder by her injuries, but Clara welcomed the pain. It gave her something to focus on besides the fear that Montgomery's men would walk through the door at any moment. The cafe filled with customers as the morning wore on. Miners still dirty from the night shift, businessmen in their Sunday suits despite it being Tuesday, women shopping for their households who stopped in for coffee and gossip. Clara kept her head down, worked steadily, and listened to the flow of conversation that filtered back to the kitchen. Silver Bend was a town in transition, she learned. The silver mines that had given it birth were playing out, but new money was coming in: cattle ranching, timber, even some talk of the railroad extending a spur line through the valley. There were tensions, too, whispers about someone called Blackwood, who owned half the territory and wanted the other half, complaints about land prices and water rights, speculation about which businesses would survive and which would fold. And then there was Eleanor Wyatt. The name first came up when 2 women lingered over coffee near the kitchen door, their voices carrying clearly in a brief lull. Did you hear Eleanor Wyatt took in another one last night? The first woman said, her tone caught between admiration and scandal. That makes 6 women, and Lord knows how many children in that house of hers. It's not right, the second woman replied, though she sounded uncertain. A woman like her, unmarried, running what amounts to a boarding house for fallen women and their bastards. The church council ought to thank God someone's willing to do the hard work they won't touch, the first woman interrupted sharply. Those women have nowhere else to go. Would you rather they starve in the streets? Or worse, go crawling back to the men who beat them? Clara's hands stilled on the carrots she was chopping. An orphanage, Ethan had mentioned yesterday. But this sounded like more than that. A refuge, a sanctuary for women with nowhere else to turn. Women like her, running from danger, desperate for safety. Everything all right back there? Marie's voice cut through Clara's thoughts. The older woman was watching her with shrewd eyes, a knowing expression on her face. Fine, Clara said quickly, returning to her work. Just listening to the customers. Town's got more gossip than sense sometimes. Marie dumped a pot of beans into a strainer, steam rising in billows. But Eleanor Wyatt. Now, there's a woman worth talking about. Does more good in a month than most do in a lifetime, and gets nothing but grief for it. What exactly does she do? Marie glanced toward the dining room, then lowered her voice. Runs a safe house, though nobody calls it that. Takes in women who need protecting, from husbands, from circumstances, from themselves sometimes. Gives them a place to stay, helps them get on their feet. The children, too, the ones with nowhere to go. It's not official, not legal exactly, but Sheriff Davis turns a blind eye because even he knows it's necessary work. Where does she get the money for it? Her own pocket, mostly. Eleanor came from money back east, Boston, I think, or maybe Philadelphia. Some kind of inheritance. She could be living high in some fancy city, but she chose to come here and spend it on people nobody else gives a damn about. Marie's expression softened. She's good people, Clara. The best kind. If you ever need help, real help, she's the one to ask. Clara filed that information away carefully. A woman with money and connections, running an underground sanctuary for the desperate. It could be useful knowledge, or it could be dangerous. She wasn't sure which yet. The lunch rush hit like a stampede, and there was no more time for conversation or eavesdropping. Clara worked until her hands were raw and her ribs screamed protest at every movement, until the world narrowed to the next potato, the next onion, the next task Marie set before her. It was mindless work in the best way, requiring enough focus to crowd out fear, but not enough to prevent the mechanical rhythm that kept her going. When the rush finally ebbed, Frank appeared in the kitchen doorway with a plate of food and a cup of coffee. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to a stool in the corner. "Eat. You've earned it." Clara didn't argue. She was too tired, too hungry, too grateful for the brief respite. The food was simple, a sandwich and some soup, but it tasted like heaven. Frank leaned against the counter, watching her with those sharp, kind eyes. "You did good today," he said. "Better than I expected, considering. Marie says you've got quick hands and you follow instructions. That's more than I can say for most who come looking for work." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Today was easy. Wait till Saturday when the miners get paid and drink half their wages before stumbling in here wanting breakfast at 2 in the morning. He smiled, taking the edge off the warning. "But if you can handle that, you've got a permanent place here. I take care of my people, Miss Hartley. You do right by me. I'll do right by you." Clara nodded, emotion tightening her throat. Kindness was dangerous. It made you want to trust, want to believe, want to let your guard down. She couldn't afford any of that. "I should get back to Ethan's place," she said, standing carefully. "He'll be expecting me." "Hold on!" Frank disappeared into the front, returning with a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Marie's got a daughter about your size. These are some things that don't fit her anymore. Nothing fancy, but they're clean and whole. Better than what you're wearing now." Clara stared at the package, then at Frank. "I can't." "You can and you will. Consider it an advance on your wages if it makes you feel better." "But Clara?" He waited until she met his eyes. "There's no shame in accepting help. I know you're used to standing on your own, but out here on the frontier, we survive by taking care of each other. Let people help you. It doesn't make you weak." The walk back to Ethan's house felt longer than the morning journey, weighted down as Clara was with exhaustion and the unexpected bundle of clothes. The sun was past its zenith, painting Silver Bend in golden light that should have been beautiful but felt somehow threatening. Every stranger on the street could be one of Montgomery's men. Every glance in her direction could be recognition. She was so focused on watching for danger that she almost didn't see the commotion until she was nearly on top of it. A crowd had gathered outside the general store, voices raised in anger and excitement. Clara slowed, instinct warning her to turn away, to avoid attention. But something held her there. The particular quality of the shouting, the way the crowd was focused on something, someone, at its center. She pushed closer, craning to see. In the middle of the crowd stood a tall man with slicked back hair and a smile too wide for his narrow face. He wore a suit that was just a touch too fine for Silver Bend, a watch chain that caught the light too obviously. And in his hands, he held what looked like letters, dozens of them, waving them like trophies. "Proof!" the man was shouting, his voice carrying over the muttering crowd. "Proof that Eleanor Wyatt has been deceiving you all. These letters show her true purpose, recruitment for immoral purposes, trafficking in human souls under the guise of charity." Clara's blood ran cold. This was no random crowd. This was a mob in the making. "That's a lie, Garrett Drake, and you know it." A woman's voice cut through the noise, strong and cultured despite the fury in it. The crowd parted slightly, and Clara caught a glimpse of a woman in her 30s, dark-haired and straight-backed, her face flushed with anger. Those letters are private correspondence and you have no right. I have every right. Drake's smile widened. These were delivered to the telegraph office in error, addressed to your so-called orphanage. The contents speak for themselves, Miss Wyatt. Letters from women seeking to join your establishment. Letters that make it clear exactly what kind of house you're running. Eleanor Wyatt, it had to be her, stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides. Those women are seeking refuge from violence and poverty. If you bother to actually read those letters instead of twisting their meaning. Oh, I've read them. Drake selected one from his handful, waving it dramatically. Listen to this one. I am desperate to escape my current situation. I will do anything, accept any terms, if you can provide sanctuary. Anything, she says. Any terms. He looked at the crowd with mock sympathy. Sounds like the language of desperation, doesn't it? The kind of desperation immoral men prey upon? The crowd murmured, uncertainty rippling through them. Clara could see it happening, the way Drake was poisoning the well, turning genuine charity into something sordid and suspicious. A few people were already nodding, wanting to believe the worst. You're twisting the truth, Eleanor's voice shook with fury. Those women are fleeing abuse, seeking safety. From one kind of abuse to another, perhaps? Drake's smile was venomous. Tell me, Miss Wyatt, how exactly do these desperate women repay your generosity? What services do they provide in exchange for your shelter? How dare you? Eleanor surged forward, but someone held her back. Clara couldn't see who, but the restraining hand was probably all that kept Eleanor from physically attacking the slanderer. Clara's mind raced. The letters were private, Drake had said, delivered to the telegraph office in error. But there was no error about this. This was deliberate, calculated. Someone had intercepted Eleanor's correspondence and given it to Drake to use as a weapon. But why? What did anyone gain from destroying Eleanor's reputation? I think we've heard enough. A new voice, this one male and authoritative. The crowd parted further, and Clara saw Sheriff Davis pushing through, his badge catching the light. He was older, maybe 50, with iron gray hair, and the kind of face that had seen too much to be easily shocked. Drake, you're causing a disturbance. Move along. I'm exercising my right to free speech, Sheriff, informing the good people of Silver Bend about the viper in their midst. You're slandering a respectable woman based on stolen correspondence. Davis's hand moved to rest on his gun belt, not quite threatening, but close enough. Last I checked, tampering with the mail is a federal offense. These letters were delivered in error, as I said. I'm merely bringing important information to light. You're lying through your teeth, and we both know it. A new figure pushed through the crowd, and Clara's heart sank even as relief flooded through her. Ethan Westlake, his face dark with anger, his whole body radiating barely controlled fury. Those letters didn't arrive in error. You paid James Sullivan at the telegraph office to intercept them. Everyone knows Sullivan would sell his own mother for drinking money. Drake's smile faltered for just a moment before reassembling itself. That's quite an accusation, Westlake. Can you prove it? Can you prove they arrived in error? Can you show us the envelope with the wrong address? The delivery records that support your story? Ethan stepped forward until he was nearly nose to nose with Drake. Or did you just pay Sullivan to hand over Eleanor's private mail so you could manufacture a scandal? The crowd was shifting now, uncertainty giving way to doubt. Clara could see it in their faces. They knew Drake's reputation, knew he was a schemer and a charmer, someone who always had an angle. The question was whether his angle here was malicious enough to make them choose Eleanor over their own prejudices. I don't have to prove anything, Drake said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. The letters speak for themselves. If Miss Wyatt's conscience is clear, she has nothing to fear from the truth. The truth is that you're a liar and a fraud, Ethan said flatly. And if you don't hand over those letters and apologize to Miss Wyatt right now, I'm going to drag you to the sheriff's office myself and let Davis sort out exactly how you came by private correspondence. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Then Drake's smile returned, sharper and meaner than before. This isn't over, Westlake. You and your friend Miss Wyatt can pretend all you want that her little charity is innocent, but people are starting to ask questions. Where do all those women come from? Where do they go when they leave? What really happens in that house? He turned to the crowd, raising his voice. Mark my words, good people of Silver Bend. The truth will come out. And when it does, you'll remember that Garrett Drake tried to warn you. He threw the letters at Eleanor's feet and strode away, pushing through the crowd with dramatic flair. The sheriff watched him go, his expression disgusted, then bent to help Eleanor gather the scattered papers. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," Davis said quietly. "If I could arrest him for being a snake, I would. But he's right that he hasn't technically broken any laws I can prove." "It's all right, Tom." Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hand shook as she collected the letters. "The damage is done anyway. People heard what they wanted to hear." "Not all of us." Ethan knelt beside her, helping gather the papers. "Drake's a known con artist. Most people here know better than to believe him." "Most isn't all." Eleanor looked up at the dispersing crowd, at the faces that wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "It only takes a few whispers to poison a reputation. You know that as well as I do." Clara stood frozen on the edge of the scene, her mind working furiously. Drake's attack on Eleanor felt familiar somehow, the tactics eerily similar to the way Montgomery had destroyed reputations back in Kansas City. Manufacture a scandal, spread it through seemingly legitimate channels, let public opinion do the rest. It was efficient, brutal, and nearly impossible to defend against. But why target Eleanor? A woman running a charity shelter shouldn't be a threat to anyone, unless the shelter itself was the problem, unless someone wanted those women and children vulnerable, wanted to close down the one place in Silver Bend where the desperate could find refuge. Someone like Frank Blackwood, perhaps. The rancher Ethan had mentioned, the man with his fingers in everything, the one who already owned half the territory and wanted the other half. Clara's eyes found Ethan, still kneeling beside Eleanor, his face tight with anger and something else. Worry, maybe, or fear. He cared about Eleanor, that much was obvious. Cared enough to publicly confront Drake, to risk making himself a target. And Clara, standing here watching, had just witnessed the opening salvo in what looked like a war for the soul of Silver Bend. A war between people like Eleanor, who wanted to help, and people like Drake, and whoever was pulling his strings, who saw charity as a threat to their interests. She should walk away, should return to Ethan's house, lock herself in the attic room, and pretend she'd seen nothing. This wasn't her fight. She had enough problems without borrowing someone else's. But even as she thought it, Clara knew she couldn't. Knew that Eleanor Wyatt and her shelter for desperate women were exactly the kind of cause her sister Margaret would have defended to her last breath. That walking away from this would be walking away from everything Margaret had believed in, everything she'd died trying to protect. Clara was still standing there, frozen between self-preservation and conscience, when Ethan's eyes found hers across the emptying street. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or a question she wasn't sure how to answer. Then Eleanor followed his gaze, and Clara found herself pinned by the direct stare of a woman who'd just been publicly attacked and was looking for allies. "You're the stagecoach survivor," Eleanor said, standing with the rescued letters clutched to her chest. "Clara Hartley, Frank Walsh mentioned you this morning." "Yes, ma'am." "Were you here for the whole—" Eleanor gestured vaguely at the now empty space where Drake had stood. "Performance?" "Most of it," Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Then I apologize for the welcome to Silver Bend. We're not usually quite this theatrical with our character assassinations. Drake must be feeling ambitious today." "He's feeling paid," Ethan said grimly. "Someone's backing him, feeding him information, telling him when and where to strike. Drake's too lazy to orchestrate something like this on his own." "Blackwood," Eleanor said the name like a curse. "Probably, or someone working for him." Ethan finally stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Either way, this isn't the end of it. Drake's just testing the waters, seeing how the town reacts. If he thinks there's blood in the water, he'll attack again." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, weariness settling over her features like a shroud. "Then I'll need to be ready. Build support, counter the rumors before they take root. Make sure people understand what the shelter really does." She opened her eyes, and there was steel in them now. "I won't let them destroy what I've built. Those women and children need a safe place, and I'll be damned if Garrett Drake or Frank Blackwood or anyone else takes that away from them." Clara spoke before she could stop herself. "The telegraph clerk, Sullivan. If he's the one who gave Drake the letters, he's the weak link. He could be convinced to tell the truth about who paid him." Both Ethan and Eleanor turned to look at her, surprise evident on their faces. "That's true," Eleanor said slowly, "but Sullivan's a drunk and a coward. Getting him to admit anything, especially against someone as powerful as Blackwood, would be nearly impossible." Not if he thought it was his only way out. Clara's mind was racing now, piecing together a plan from instinct and desperation. If you could prove he accepted payment to steal private mail, that's a federal crime. The sheriff said so himself. Sullivan's looking at prison time. But if he cooperated, testified against whoever paid him, a good lawyer might be able to get him a lighter sentence. Ethan was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You've thought about this kind of thing before." It wasn't a question. Clara met his eyes, refusing to flinch. "I've seen how powerful people destroy the weak. I've seen how they use intermediaries to keep their own hands clean. And I've seen how those intermediaries can be turned if you offer them the right incentive." "Or the right threat," Eleanor added, her gaze sharp and assessing. "You're not just a seamstress, are you, Miss Hartley?" Clara's heart stuttered. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean you talk like someone who understands power and corruption intimately. Someone who studied it, lived through it, survived it." Eleanor stepped closer, her voice dropping. "I recognize the look in your eyes. It's the same one I see in the mirror sometimes. The look of someone who's been hunted, who's learned to think 3 steps ahead because falling behind means death." The silence that fell was heavy with unspoken questions. Clara could feel Ethan's eyes on her, could sense his curiosity warring with his stated desire not to know her secrets, could feel Eleanor's assessment, the weighing of risks and benefits. "My past is my own," Clara said finally, keeping her voice steady. "But if you want to fight back against Drake, and whoever's behind him, I might be able to help. Not because I'm anyone special, but because I know how men like that think, how they operate." Eleanor considered this for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "All right, come to the shelter tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. We'll talk about Sullivan and how to approach him." She glanced at Ethan. "You'll be there?" "Wouldn't miss it." Ethan's voice was dry, but Clara could hear the commitment underneath. "Though I'm starting to think this is going to get a lot more complicated before it gets simpler." "When has anything in Silver Bend ever been simple?" Eleanor managed a real smile this time, tired but genuine. "Thank you both. For standing up for me today. For believing in what I'm trying to do. It means more than you know." She left then, walking away with her shoulders squared and her head high, every inch a lady despite the mud Drake had tried to sling at her. Clara watched her go, admiration and concern warring in her chest. "That was stupid," Ethan said once Eleanor was out of earshot. Clara turned to him. "What was?" "Offering to help. Getting involved. Putting yourself on anyone's radar when you're trying to stay invisible." He shook his head, frustration clear in every line of his body. "You've been in town less than 2 days, and you're already tangling yourself up in local politics and schemes. Do you have a death wish?" "I have a conscience," Clara shot back, "and I know what it's like to be targeted by powerful men who think they can destroy you just because they want to. I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen to someone else if I can help prevent it. Even if helping puts you in danger? Even if it draws attention you can't afford?" "Yes." The word came out fierce, certain, even then. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both." "Definitely both." But there was a hint of grudging respect in his voice now. "Come on, you look like you're about to collapse, and I need to get back to the ranch. Whatever crusade you're planning with Eleanor can wait until you've had some rest." They walked back to his house in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Less hostile, more contemplative. Clara could feel Ethan processing what he'd witnessed, what she'd revealed about herself without meaning to. Could feel him adjusting his assumptions, his carefully maintained distance. At the house, he stopped her before she could climb the stairs to her room. "Clara." He waited until she turned to face him. "What you did today, speaking up about Sullivan, that was smart, strategic, the kind of thinking that comes from experience, not just observation." His eyes searched her face. "I meant what I said about not wanting to know your secrets. But I need to know one thing. Are you dangerous?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Not to you, Clara said finally. Not to Eleanor or Frank or anyone in this town who doesn't deserve it, but to the people who are after me. She held his gaze. Yes, I hope so, because if I'm not dangerous to them, I'm already dead. Ethan absorbed this, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, sharply. Fair enough. Just remember what I said. Keep your problems away from my door, and if you're going to fight Eleanor's battles, make sure you're not using her to fight your own. He left before she could respond, heading out the back door toward the stables. Clara climbed the stairs slowly, her body screaming protest at every step. In her room, she changed into one of the dresses Frank had given her, simple blue calico that fit reasonably well, and felt like luxury after the ruined clothes she'd been wearing. She pulled the ledger from its hiding place and sat on the bed, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. Inside these pages was everything she needed to destroy Harrison Montgomery, to clear her name, to get justice for Margaret. But using it meant revealing herself, meant stepping into the light and becoming a target again. And now she was contemplating helping Eleanor fight her own battle against powerful enemies, adding more danger, more risk, more chances for everything to fall apart. Margaret would have done it without hesitation, would have thrown herself into the fight for those desperate women and children, consequences be damned. But Margaret was dead, killed by the very man this ledger could destroy. Clara closed her eyes, exhaustion and indecision weighing her down. Tomorrow she'd go to Eleanor's shelter. Tomorrow she'd start planning how to expose Sullivan, and through him, whoever was orchestrating the attacks on Eleanor's work. Tomorrow she'd take another step away from invisibility and toward the confrontation she both feared and craved. But tonight she would rest, would let herself believe just for a few hours that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life here, could make a difference, could find a way to honor Margaret's memory without sacrificing her own survival. Outside her window, Silver Bend settled into evening, lights winking on in windows, the sounds of dinner and conversation drifting on the breeze. Ordinary life continuing its ordinary rhythms, unaware of the storms gathering on the horizon. Clara put the ledger away, lay down on the narrow bed, and let sleep take her. Tomorrow's battles could wait. Tonight, she needed to gather her strength, because something told her she was going to need every ounce of courage she possessed for what was coming. The next day passed in a blur of kitchen work and nervous anticipation. Clara's hands moved mechanically through the familiar tasks, peeling, chopping, washing, while her mind circled endlessly around what awaited her that evening at Eleanor's shelter. She'd committed herself to helping, but the reality of that commitment felt heavier with each passing hour. Every time the cafe door opened, she tensed, half expecting to see Montgomery's men or Garrett Drake's smug face. Marie noticed her distraction around midday, when Clara nearly sliced her finger instead of the onion she was supposed to be dicing. "Careful there," the older woman said, gently taking the knife from Clara's hands. "Whatever's eating at you, it's not worth losing a finger over. Why don't you take a break? Go get some air." Clara nodded gratefully and stepped out the back door into the alley behind the cafe. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the distant promise of winter. She leaned against the rough brick wall, closing her eyes and trying to steady her breathing. Hiding or thinking? Clara's eyes snapped open. Ethan stood at the mouth of the alley, leading his horse, his expression as unreadable as ever. Neither, just taking a break. He tied the horse to a post and walked closer, studying her face. "You look like you're about to walk into battle." "Maybe I am." "Eleanor's meeting isn't until 7. You've got hours yet to work yourself into a panic." There was something almost gentle in his tone, though his face remained impassive. "Whatever you're planning, make sure it's worth the risk." "It is." Clara straightened, meeting his eyes. "Those women Eleanor helps, they're running from the same kind of danger I am. Different specifics, maybe, but the same essential threat. Men who think they own people, who think they have the right to destroy anyone who gets in their way. If I can help stop that here, even a little bit, then yes, it's worth the risk." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. "Someone who couldn't walk past injustice without trying to fix it, even when it cost her everything." "Your sister?" The guess came from nowhere, but Clara saw the flinch in his expression and knew she'd hit the mark. How did you... He stopped, shook his head. Never mind. Yes, my sister, Anna. She had your same stubborn righteousness, your same inability to stay out of trouble when someone needed help. His voice went rough. It got her taken. 10 years ago, by men who saw her kindness as weakness to exploit. Clara's heart clenched. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just be careful. Ethan turned to leave, then paused. I'll be at Eleanor's tonight, too. Whatever plan you're cooking up, you're not doing it alone. He was gone before Clara could respond, swinging up onto his horse and riding off toward the edge of town. She watched him go, a dozen questions forming and dissolving on her tongue. Anna, taken 10 years ago. And Ethan had been searching ever since. She could see it in the way he'd spoken, in the carefully controlled pain that bled through his words. How many people in Silver Bend were running from something, searching for something, trying to outrun or outlive their pasts? How many secrets were buried beneath the ordinary surface of this frontier town? The afternoon crawled by. Clara forced herself to focus on her work, to ignore the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. When Frank finally dismissed her at 6, she had just enough time to return to Ethan's house, change into the cleanest of the dresses she'd been given, and make herself presentable. Ethan was waiting for her downstairs, freshly cleaned up himself, his dark hair still damp. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be. They walked through the evening streets together, the setting sun painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Eleanor's shelter was on the far edge of town, a large house that had probably once belonged to some mining magnate who'd struck it rich and then moved on to better prospects. It was well-maintained, lights glowing in nearly every window, the sound of children's laughter drifting from somewhere inside. Eleanor answered the door herself, her face softening when she saw them. You came. I wasn't entirely sure you would. I said I'd help, Clara replied simply. Words are easy. Following through is harder. Eleanor stepped aside to let them in. It was warm and welcoming, if somewhat shabby. Worn rugs covered the floors, mismatched furniture filled the rooms, and the walls held children's drawings alongside faded photographs. It was clearly a home, lived in and loved, despite whatever scandalous purpose Garrett Drake wanted people to believe it served. Eleanor led them to a small study at the back of the house, closing the door against the domestic sounds beyond. Inside, a man Clara didn't recognize was already waiting, older than Ethan, maybe 45, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent years in the sun and the sharp eyes of someone who missed nothing. Clara Hartley, Ethan Westlake, this is Judge Marcus Fletcher, Eleanor said. I've asked him to join us because if we're going to do this properly, we need legal counsel. The judge stood, extending his hand first to Clara, then to Ethan. Miss Hartley, Mr. Westlake, Eleanor has told me about yesterday's incident with Mr. Drake. Nasty business, using stolen correspondence to manufacture scandal. Can we prove it was stolen? Clara asked, shaking his hand. Or will it be Sullivan's word against Drake's? That's what we're here to determine. Fletcher settled back into his chair, his expression thoughtful. Eleanor, why don't you start by telling us exactly how your correspondence works? Who knows you received letters? How are they delivered? Eleanor took a seat behind the desk, her hands folded in front of her. Women who need help usually find out about the shelter through word of mouth, from former residents, from sympathetic locals, sometimes from sources back east where I still have connections. They write to me care of general delivery at the post office. James Sullivan, as the telegraph clerk and postal worker, receives the letters and is supposed to deliver them here directly. It's a small town. Everyone knows everyone's business. There's no formal privacy, but there's an understanding that personal correspondence remains personal. And the letters Drake displayed yesterday, Fletcher prompted, were from 3 different women, all seeking refuge. One from Kansas City, one from Denver, one from a mining camp about 50 miles north. All desperate, all in danger. Eleanor's voice tightened. The letters were intimate, detailed. They described abuse, threats, fear for their lives and their children's lives. For Drake to wave them around like carnival posters was vile, Ethan supplied, and calculated. He knew exactly which phrases to pull out of context to make it sound like you were recruiting prostitutes instead of helping victims. Fletcher nodded slowly. The question is whether we can prove Drake obtained those letters illegally. If Sullivan simply handed them over without payment or coercion, there may not be a crime we can prosecute. But there is a crime, Clara interjected. All eyes turned to her. Tampering with mail. It doesn't matter if Sullivan handed the letters over willingly. He had no legal right to share private correspondence with anyone other than the intended recipient. That's a federal offense. True, Fletcher acknowledged, but proving criminal intent is another matter. Sullivan could claim he thought he was acting in the public interest, exposing wrongdoing. Misguided, certainly, but not necessarily criminal. Clara leaned forward, her mind working through the angles. Then we don't approach this as a legal problem first. We approach it as a practical one. Sullivan is a drunk and a coward. Everyone said as much. Men like that have pressure points. We find his, and we squeeze until he tells us the truth. What kind of pressure points? Eleanor asked, her tone carefully neutral. Debts, secrets, fears. Clara ticked them off on her fingers. A man who drinks as much as Sullivan reportedly does needs money for his habit. He's probably in debt to half the town. And if he's been taking bribes from Drake, or from whoever's behind Drake, there's probably a trail. Money that appeared suddenly, bills that got paid unexpectedly, drinking binges that coincided with payoffs. Ethan was watching her with that same assessing look from yesterday. You've done this before. Investigated someone, found their weaknesses, exploited them. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. I've watched it being done, learned from it. She didn't elaborate, and thankfully, no one pushed. Fletcher stroked his chin thoughtfully. If we could prove Sullivan received payment for those letters, that would establish the arrangement as a commercial transaction. That changes the legal landscape significantly. How do we prove it? Eleanor asked. We talked to people who might have noticed, Clara said. Bartenders who might have seen Sullivan suddenly flush with cash. Shopkeepers who might have extended him credit and then been paid off. Anyone who might have observed a change in his financial situation around the time those letters were intercepted. That's a lot of people to talk to, Ethan pointed out. And word will get around. Sullivan will know we're asking questions. Good. Clara's smile was sharp. Let him know. Let him panic. Panicked men make mistakes, say things they shouldn't, run to whoever's pulling their strings for protection. If we're lucky, he'll lead us right to the source. Eleanor exchanged a look with Fletcher. That's risky. If Blackwood is behind this, and we all suspect he is, pushing too hard could bring retaliation. It's going to bring retaliation anyway, Clara countered. Drake's attack yesterday was just the opening move. They're testing the waters, seeing if they can destroy your reputation with whispers and stolen letters. When that doesn't work, and it won't, not completely, they'll escalate. Better to control the battlefield now than to let them choose the time and place. The room fell silent. Clara could feel them weighing her words, assessing the risk against the potential reward. She knew she was asking them to trust her judgment, her instincts, when they barely knew her. But she also knew she was right. Men like Montgomery, like Blackwood, they operated from a playbook. You either disrupted their plans or you became their victim. All right, Eleanor said finally. We do this carefully, systematically. Fletcher, can you start asking questions among the business owners? You have relationships there, standing that won't raise immediate suspicion. I can, Fletcher agreed, though I should note that once we start this, there's no stopping it. We'll be committed to seeing it through, wherever it leads. Wherever it leads, Eleanor echoed, her jaw set with determination. Those women and children upstairs, the ones sleeping safely tonight because they have refuge here, they're worth fighting for. If Blackwood wants to destroy this shelter to serve his own purposes, he's going to have to go through me first. Ethan shifted in his chair. There's something else we should consider. If Blackwood is targeting the shelter, it's because it threatens him somehow. We should figure out why. What does Eleanor's charity have to do with his business interests? It was a good question, one Clara had been pondering herself. What does Blackwood want? She asked. What's his endgame in Silver Bend? Eleanor's expression darkened. Control. He owns the largest ranch in the territory, controls most of the water rights, and has been systematically buying up property in town. The shelter sits on a large lot right at the edge of his holdings. He's approached me twice about selling, and I've refused both times. Because you need the space for the shelter, Clara guessed, and because I won't help him consolidate more power. Eleanor's hands clenched. Blackwood doesn't just want to own Silver Bend. He wants to own the people in it. The shelter represents independence, a place his influence can't reach. It's a reminder that there are limits to what money and intimidation can buy. So destroying the shelter serves multiple purposes, Fletcher mused. It opens up valuable property for acquisition, removes a symbol of resistance to his authority, and eliminates a refuge for people trying to escape situations he might profit from. Clara's blood ran cold. What do you mean, situations he profits from? The three of them exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice carefully controlled. There are rumors, nothing proven, nothing we can take to the law. But some of the women who've ended up at Eleanor's shelter, they've told stories about being promised jobs at Blackwood's ranch or his other properties, only to find themselves trapped, unable to leave, forced to work without pay, threatened if they try to run. Slavery, Clara breathed. He's running some kind of labor trafficking operation. We don't know that for certain, Fletcher cautioned. The women's stories are fragmentary, often confused by trauma. And Blackwood is careful. He uses intermediaries, keeps his own hands clean. But yes, the pattern suggests something deeply wrong. Clara's mind was racing. This was bigger than she'd realized, darker than a simple property dispute or campaign of harassment. If Blackwood was trafficking people, using them as unpaid labor, then Eleanor's shelter wasn't just a nuisance to him. It was a direct threat to his operation. Every woman who escaped to the shelter was lost profit, lost control, and potentially a witness to crimes that could destroy him. The letters, she said suddenly, the ones Drake displayed, were any of them from women who'd worked for Blackwood? Eleanor's eyes widened. I'd have to check, but yes, I think at least one was. A woman from the mining camp who mentioned working in a ranch house, being afraid to leave. Then that's why Sullivan handed them over. Not just because Drake paid him, but because whoever's behind Drake, probably Blackwood, needed to know who was trying to escape, needed to intercept them before they could reach the shelter and tell their stories. The implications hung heavy in the air. They weren't just fighting to protect Eleanor's reputation anymore. They were potentially uncovering a criminal operation that spanned the entire territory. We need to be very careful, Fletcher said quietly. If what you're suggesting is true, we're not dealing with simple corruption or business rivalry. We're dealing with men who've committed serious crimes and will do whatever it takes to protect themselves. Then we need evidence, Ethan said. Real, concrete evidence. Not just rumors and scared women's stories, but proof that will hold up in court. Sullivan, Clara said, if we can get him to talk, to provide details about who paid him and why, it could be the thread that unravels everything. A drunk telegraph clerk isn't going to bring down someone like Blackwood, Ethan countered. Even if he confesses, even if he testifies, Blackwood's lawyers will tear him apart on the stand. But he could lead us to others, Clara insisted, to the intermediaries Blackwood uses, to records, payments, witnesses who can corroborate the bigger picture. We start with Sullivan because he's the weak link we can access. But we don't stop there. Eleanor stood, pacing to the window. Outside, full dark had fallen, Silver Bend settling into its evening rhythms. This is dangerous. More dangerous than I thought when I asked you here. Clara, you don't owe us this. You've been in town 3 days. You could walk away right now and no one would blame you. Clara thought of the ledger hidden in her room, of Margaret lying dead in Kansas City, of all the women Montgomery had hurt in his climb to power. Thought of the stagecoach passengers who died because he wanted her silenced. Thought of the desperate letters Eleanor received from women seeking refuge. I can't walk away, she said simply. I've seen what happens when good people do nothing. I've lived it. If I can help stop it here, I have to try. Ethan was shaking his head, but there was resignation in his eyes. You're going to get yourself killed with this savior complex. Maybe, but I'll die knowing I tried to do something right. Clara turned to Fletcher. How do we approach Sullivan? We can't just confront him directly. He'll run straight to whoever's paying him. We need leverage first, Fletcher said. Information we can use to pressure him. If I can find proof that he came into money around the time those letters were stolen, that gives us something to work with. But it will take time, a few days at least. We might not have a few days, Eleanor said. Drake's already planted the seeds of doubt. If Blackwood pushes his agenda in the meantime, then we fight on multiple fronts, Clara interrupted. Fletcher investigates Sullivan. Eleanor, you work on rebuilding trust in the community, making sure people understand the truth about the shelter. And Ethan and I will do what exactly? Ethan's tone was skeptical. Clara met his eyes. We watch. We listen. We find out everything we can about Blackwood's operation, his associates, his properties. We look for patterns, connections, anything that might give us an advantage when the time comes to move against him. That's asking us to investigate one of the most powerful men in the territory, Ethan said flatly. A man who's already shown he's willing to destroy reputations, and possibly worse to protect his interests. I know. A man who has resources, connections, and no apparent conscience. I know. You're insane, Clara smiled without humor. Probably, but I'm also right, and you know it. We can't fight Blackwood with half measures. We either commit fully or we surrender now and let him crush Eleanor, the shelter, and everyone who depends on it. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of the decision before them. Clara could see the calculation in each face. Fletcher weighing legal ramifications, Eleanor considering the safety of the women and children in her care, Ethan wrestling with his own demons and the ghosts of past failures. I'm in, Eleanor said finally, her voice steady. All the way, whatever it takes. Fletcher nodded slowly. As am I, though I'll need to be circumspect in my involvement. A judge can't be seen to be conducting vigilante investigations. All eyes turned to Ethan. He stood there, jaw clenched, every line of his body radiating tension. Clara could see the war being waged behind his eyes, the desire to help warring with the fear of failure, of loss, of watching someone else he cared about walk into danger. Ethan, Eleanor said softly, I'm not asking you to— Yes, you are. His voice was rough. You're asking all of us to risk everything on a plan that could blow up in our faces, to go against a man who might have had my sister taken, who might be responsible for God knows how many other disappearances and cruelties. He looked at Clara. And you're asking me to trust a woman I barely know, who's clearly running from her own demons, who could be leading us into a trap for all I know. Clara absorbed the blow without flinching. You're right not to trust me. You'd be a fool to trust me. But you can trust that I want Blackwood exposed as much as you do. Maybe for different reasons, but the goal's the same. Why? Ethan demanded. Why do you care so much? What's your stake in this? The words came before Clara could stop them. Because I know what it's like to be hunted by powerful men. To watch people you love die because they stood up for what was right. To have evidence that could destroy your enemies and be too terrified to use it because you know it will make you a target. She took a breath, steadying herself. I'm tired of running, Ethan. Tired of hiding. Tired of watching bad men win because good people are too afraid to fight back. Maybe I can't use what I know to bring down the man who destroyed my life. Not yet. But I can help bring down Blackwood. And maybe that's enough. The confession hung in the air, more than Clara had meant to reveal. Less than the full truth, but enough to lay bare her motivations. She saw understanding dawn in Eleanor's eyes, calculation in Fletcher's, and something more complicated in Ethan's. You have evidence, Ethan said slowly, against someone powerful enough that you'd rather run than fight. Clara said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. Christ, Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair. You're not just running from something, you're sitting on something that could— What? Destroy a business empire? Expose corruption? Both? It doesn't matter, Clara said firmly. That's my fight, my burden. This, helping Eleanor, stopping Blackwood, this I can do. This I can help with. Let that be enough. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then turned to Eleanor. If we do this, we do it smart. No unnecessary risks, no heroic gestures, no martyrdom. We gather information, we build a case, and we don't move until we're sure we can win. Agreed, Eleanor said. And when this is over, when Blackwood is exposed or destroyed or whatever end we manage to bring about— Ethan's eyes cut back to Clara. "Wh- You and I are going to have a long conversation about these demons you're running from and whether they're going to show up on my doorstep." Fair enough, Clara agreed, though she had no intention of having that conversation. By the time Blackwood was dealt with, she'd have to be long gone from Silver Bend anyway. Montgomery's men would find her eventually. They always did. Fletcher stood, straightening his jacket. "Then we have a plan, such as it is. I'll start investigating Sullivan's finances quietly. Eleanor, you focus on community relations, and you too," he gestured at Clara and Ethan, "do your watching and listening. But for God's sake, be careful. We're playing a dangerous game, and the stakes are higher than any of us want to contemplate." They filed out of the study, Eleanor walking them to the door. In the hallway, they passed a young woman with haunted eyes holding a baby, and Clara felt the full weight of what they were protecting. These weren't abstract victims or theoretical casualties. They were real people, seeking real refuge, depending on Eleanor's courage and the secrecy of her operation. At the door, Eleanor caught Clara's arm. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for understanding, for helping, for being willing to fight when you could just as easily hide." "I'm done hiding," Clara replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "At least for now." The walk back through Silver Bend's dark streets was quiet. Ethan seemed lost in thought, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his expression closed off. Clara didn't try to break the silence. She was too busy processing everything they'd learned, everything they'd committed to. They were nearly to Ethan's house when he finally spoke. "My sister, Anna. She was helping women too. Women trying to escape bad situations, trying to get away from men who thought they owned them." His voice was low, almost painful to hear. She was 17, stubborn as hell, convinced she could save everyone. One of the women she was helping, the woman's husband, was connected to Blackwood, did work for him, collections or enforcement or something. When Anna helped his wife escape, he came looking for payback. Clara's heart clenched. What happened? She disappeared. No trace, no body, no ransom demand. Just gone. Ethan's jaw worked. "I've been searching for 10 years, following rumors, chasing shadows, grasping at any hint that she might still be alive somewhere. And every trail, every whisper, every possible lead, they all circle back to Blackwood eventually." "You think he took her?" "I think he has a system, a network, places where people disappear to, where they're kept, used, hidden away from anyone who might look for them. I think Anna's somewhere in that system, if she's still alive. And I think Eleanor's shelter threatens to expose it, which is why Blackwood wants it destroyed." The pieces were clicking together in Clara's mind, forming a picture even darker than she'd imagined. "You're not just helping Eleanor to be noble, you're hoping this leads you to your sister." "I'm hoping it leads me to answers, to justice, to something that makes the last 10 years of searching mean something." Ethan stopped, turning to face her in the darkness. "You asked why I'm helping, that's why. Not because I'm a good man or because I believe in noble causes, because I'm desperate and angry and willing to do whatever it takes to find my sister or destroy the people who took her. Understand?" Clara did understand. Understood the consuming need for justice, for vengeance, for answers that might never come. Understood the way past trauma could drive you to take risks that rational thought said were insane. "Then we help each other," she said. "You help me bring down Blackwood, I help you find your sister. No judgment, no questions about motives. Just two people with their own reasons working toward the same goal." Ethan studied her face in the dim light from a distant street lamp. "You really are running from something terrible, aren't you? Something that made you into this, whatever this is. This hardness wrapped around desperation." "We all run from something," Clara deflected. "The question is whether we run forever or eventually turn and fight. And you've decided to fight. For now, here. For Eleanor and those women and children. For your sister, if we can find her. For whatever small piece of justice we can carve out of this mess." Clara managed a tired smile. "Tomorrow, I might go back to running, but tonight, I'm standing my ground." Ethan nodded slowly, some understanding passing between them. They finished the walk to his house in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their own plans, their own fears about what they'd set in motion. Inside, Ethan paused at the base of the stairs. Clara, what you said back there about having evidence against someone. If you ever decide to use it, to stop running and start fighting that battle too, you won't be alone. Whatever debts I owe you for helping with this Blackwood situation, consider them paid forward. Before Clara could respond, he disappeared into his room, leaving her standing in the quiet house with those unexpected words echoing in her mind. She climbed to her attic room slowly, exhaustion finally catching up with the day's emotional toll. The ledger was still hidden safely beneath the floorboard, its secrets intact, its potential still waiting to be unleashed. Someday, Clara thought, pulling it out and holding it close. Someday she'd use it. Someday she'd stop running from Montgomery and start hunting him instead. But not yet. First there was Blackwood to deal with, Eleanor to protect, Ethan's sister to search for. First, she had to prove to herself that she could fight and win. Clara tucked the ledger away again and lay down on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd begin watching and listening, gathering the information they'd need to bring down one of the most powerful men in the territory. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, for the first time since Margaret's death, Clara felt something other than fear and grief. She felt purpose. And in the darkness of her small room at the edge of Silver Bend, that was enough to let her sleep. The following days settled into a careful rhythm of observation and quiet investigation. Clara worked her shifts at the Mountain View Cafe with renewed focus, her ears attuned to every conversation, every snippet of gossip that might prove useful. The cafe was proving to be exactly what she'd hoped, a crossroads where information flowed as freely as the coffee. On the third morning after their meeting at Eleanor's, Clara was refilling cups during the breakfast rush when she overheard two ranch hands talking in low voices at a corner table. "Blackwood's bringing in another crew next week," the younger one said, his weather-beaten face creased with concern. 20 men, maybe more. Says he needs extra hands for the winter preparations, but that's horseshit. Ranch doesn't need that many bodies just to batten down for cold weather. The older hand grunted, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of bacon. Probably got some new venture cooking. Man's always got his fingers in something. Could be he's expanding the timber operation up north, or maybe finally making his move on the Patterson property. Or maybe he needs muscle for something else entirely. The younger man's voice dropped even lower. "My cousin works the telegraph in Blackstone. Says there have been messages going back and forth between Blackwood and some outfit in Kansas City. Coded stuff, real secretive." Clara's hand froze on the coffee pot. Kansas City. Montgomery's city. The coincidence sent ice through her veins, but she forced herself to keep moving, to top off their cups with a steady hand while her mind raced. "More coffee, gentlemen?" she asked pleasantly, her face a mask of polite disinterest. "Thanks, miss." The older hand barely glanced at her, already turning back to his companion. "Kansas City, you say? That's a long way to be doing business. What kind of outfit?" "Couldn't say for sure. Banking, maybe? Or shipping? All I know is the messages are frequent, and Blackwood pays extra to keep them private." Clara moved away before they could notice her lingering, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kansas City. Banking. It could be nothing. Legitimate business between a territorial rancher and Eastern investors. But the timing felt wrong, the secrecy too deliberate. And if there was even a chance that Blackwood had connections to Montgomery's network, she nearly dropped the coffee pot when the implications hit her fully. What if Blackwood wasn't just running his own trafficking operation? What if he was connected to something larger, something that stretched from the frontier all the way back to Kansas City? What if the very man she was investigating here had ties to the man she was running from? "Clara, you all right?" Marie's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Clara managed, setting down the pot before her shaking hands could betray her. "Just felt a little dizzy for a moment." "I'll take a break. Get some air." She escaped to the alley behind the cafe, leaning against the wall and forcing herself to breathe slowly, methodically. This could change everything. If Blackwood and Montgomery were connected, then helping to expose Blackwood's operation could inadvertently reveal her location to the very man hunting her. But it could also mean that bringing down Blackwood might damage Montgomery's network, might give her leverage she didn't currently have. The back door opened and Frank stepped out, concern etched on his weathered features. Marie says you're not feeling well. You need to see Doc Brennan? No, I'm all right. Just overwhelmed for a moment. Clara straightened, trying to gather her composure. Frank, can I ask you something about Blackwood's business dealings? Frank's expression shuddered slightly. That's dangerous territory, Clara. What do you want to know? Does he have connections back east? Business partners, investors, anyone he deals with regularly outside the territory? Why are you asking? Clara made a split-second decision. Because I overheard something that might be important, about messages between Blackwood and someone in Kansas City, and I need to know if that's normal business or something else. Frank was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. You're not just a seamstress looking for work, are you? You're digging into something, investigating. Does this have to do with Eleanor and what happened with Drake? It might. I'm not sure yet. Clara met his gaze steadily. But if Blackwood has Eastern connections, especially to Kansas City, it could be significant. Frank sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw. All right, but not here, not now. Come by my place tonight after the cafe closes. I'll tell you what I know, but Clara, be careful with this information. Blackwood's reach is long, and he doesn't take kindly to people poking into his affairs. The rest of the day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Clara forced herself through the motions of her work while her mind churned with possibilities and fears. When her shift finally ended, she made her way to Frank's small house on the edge of town, a modest dwelling that spoke to a man who valued function over ostentation. Frank was waiting for her on the porch, 2 cups of coffee already poured. He gestured for her to sit, settling into his own chair with the careful movements of a man whose body bore the weight of hard years. Before I tell you anything, he said quietly, I need to understand what you're really after. Eleanor asked for your help with the Drake situation, I know that much. But this feels bigger, personal, even. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup, choosing her words carefully. I have my own reasons for wanting to understand how men like Blackwood operate, how they build their empires, who they partner with, how they protect themselves. Let's leave it at that. You're running from someone. It wasn't a question. Someone back east, someone powerful, and you think there might be a connection to Blackwood. I don't know, maybe, but I need to find out. Frank studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. All right, here's what I know. Blackwood came to Silver Bend about 15 years ago with money already in his pocket, lots of it. He bought the ranch, started acquiring property, built his empire. But the money had to come from somewhere, and the story he told about inheriting it from a deceased uncle never quite added up. So where did it come from? That's the question, isn't it? Over the years, I've pieced together bits and pieces. Blackwood has regular visitors from back east, businessmen, he calls them. They arrive quietly, stay at his ranch, conduct their meetings in private, and leave. Some of them I've recognized from wanted posters that came through the telegraph office years ago, before Sullivan took over. Con men, swindlers, men involved in various criminal enterprises. Clara's pulse quickened. What kind of enterprises? Varied. But there's been a pattern over the last decade. Labor contracts, immigration schemes, employment agencies that promise work but deliver servitude. The kind of operations that prey on desperate people, immigrants, poor families, women with no options. They promise legitimate employment and deliver something else entirely. It fit too perfectly with what they'd already suspected about Blackwood's operation. But the Eastern connections added a new dimension, suggested a network that spanned the country. Kansas City specifically, Clara pressed. Has he had dealings there? Frank's expression grew troubled. There was a man, came through about 2 years ago, banker type, expensive suit, the kind of polish that comes from old money and new corruption. He and Blackwood were thick as thieves for a week, holed up at the ranch conducting business. After he left, Blackwood's operation expanded significantly. More properties acquired, more employment opportunities advertised, more workers arriving and fewer leaving. Did you get the man's name? Never officially, but I heard Blackwood call him Reed once. Reed something or something Reed, I couldn't say for certain. The world tilted sideways. Reed Montgomery. It had to be. Montgomery sometimes used his middle name for business dealings that he wanted to keep at arm's length from his primary identity. Claire had seen it in the ledger. shell companies and shadow partnerships all bearing some variation of the Reed name. Clara? Frank's voice seemed to come from very far away. You've gone pale. Do you know who I'm talking about? She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. If Montgomery and Blackwood were partners, if they were running connected operations, then everything was infinitely more complicated and dangerous than she'd imagined. Bringing down Blackwood could alert Montgomery to her location, but leaving Blackwood's operation intact meant allowing Montgomery's network to continue destroying lives. I need to think, she managed finally. Thank you, Frank, for trusting me with this. Whatever you're planning, don't do it alone. And Clara, Frank's voice stopped her as she stood to leave. If this man, this Reed or whoever he is, if he's the one you're running from, maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to fight. Clara left without answering, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and fear. She walked through Silver Bend's darkening streets without seeing them, so consumed by her thoughts that she nearly collided with Ethan outside his house. Whoa, he said, catching her shoulders to steady her. Where's the fire? We need to talk, now, inside. Something in her tone made him ask no questions. He simply guided her into the house and closed the door behind them. Clara paced the small living room, trying to organize the chaos in her head into something coherent. Montgomery and Blackwood are connected, she said without preamble. The man I'm running from, Reed Montgomery, he's done business with Blackwood. They're partners, or at least associates, which means the operation we're investigating here is part of something much bigger. Ethan absorbed this with remarkable calm. How do you know? Clara told him about the conversation she'd overheard, about what Frank had shared, watched as Ethan's expression grew progressively darker with each revelation. So the man hunting you is the same man who might have my sister, Ethan said slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. The same network that took Anna could be the one you've been running from. It's possible, likely even, given the connections and the timeline. Clara stopped pacing, facing him directly. But Ethan, this changes our approach. If we move against Blackwood, if we expose his operation, Montgomery will know I'm here. He'll come for me, and he'll bring everything he has. Then we make sure we're ready for him when he does. You don't understand. Montgomery isn't like Blackwood. He's smarter, more careful, more connected. He has politicians, lawmen, judges in his pocket. He's untouchable in Kansas City, and his reach extends far beyond it. If he comes here, then we use what you have. Ethan's eyes were intent, almost fierce. You said you have evidence against him, evidence that could destroy him. If he comes for you, we use it. We expose everything, his connection to Blackwood, the trafficking network, all of it. Clara's hand instinctively moved to her chest, as if she could feel the ledger even from a distance. Using that evidence means revealing myself, means stepping into the light and accepting that I'll be a target for the rest of my life, however long or short that might be. You're already a target. The only question is whether you're a target who's hiding or a target who's fighting back. Ethan moved closer, his intensity almost overwhelming. Clara, if this bastard took my sister, if he's part of the network that's been destroying lives for God knows how long, then we have to stop him. Not just Blackwood, but Montgomery too. We have to burn the whole damn thing down. The passion in his voice was raw, painful to hear. This was a man who'd spent a decade searching, hoping, grieving. A man who'd finally found a thread that might lead to answers, and he was willing to pull it no matter what unraveled in the process. It could get us all killed, Clara said quietly. We're already risking our lives going after Blackwood. What's one more monster to slay? Ethan's laugh was bitter. Besides, you said it yourself. You're done hiding. Here's your chance to prove it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Ethan tensed, his hand moving automatically to the gun at his hip. Clara's heart raced as he moved to the door, every nerve screaming that this was it. Montgomery's men had found her. It was over. But when Ethan opened the door, it was Fletcher who stood there, his face grim in the lamplight. We have a problem, the judge said without preamble. Sullivan's gone. Disappeared sometime this afternoon. His room at the boarding house is cleaned out, and the telegraph office is locked up tight. Whatever spooked him, he's run. Clara's mind raced. Did someone warn him? Let him know we were investigating? Possibly, or he figured it out on his own. Sullivan's a coward, but he's not stupid. He might have sensed the net closing and decided to run before we could spring the trap. Fletcher stepped inside, his expression troubled. But here's the thing. Mrs. Chen saw him leaving town in a wagon, Blackwood's wagon, driven by one of Blackwood's men. The implications were clear and chilling. Sullivan hadn't just run. He'd run to Blackwood, either for protection or because Blackwood had summoned him to prevent him from talking. Then Blackwood knows we're onto him, Ethan said grimly. He knows we were investigating Sullivan, which means he knows we're making the connection to the stolen letters and probably to his larger operation. Which means he'll move to protect himself, Clara added. Destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, maybe even go after Eleanor more directly. We need to warn her. Fletcher was already moving toward the door. If Blackwood thinks she's orchestrating an investigation against him, he might not settle for character assassination this time. They moved quickly through the darkened streets. 3 figures with a single purpose. Silver Ben felt different now, hostile somehow, as if the very shadows might conceal Blackwood's watchers. Clara found herself scanning every doorway, every alley, her body taut with the anticipation of attack. Eleanor's house was blazing with light when they arrived, but something felt wrong. The front door stood slightly ajar, and there were no sounds of children, no domestic warmth emanating from within. Ethan drew his gun, signaling for Clara and Fletcher to stay back. He approached the door cautiously, then pushed it open fully. Clara's breath caught at what she saw. The interior of the house had been ransacked. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied, papers scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. But there was no sign of Eleanor or any of the women and children who should have been there. "Eleanor," Ethan called, moving through the destruction with his gun raised. "Eleanor, are you here?" Silence answered him. Clara picked her way through the debris, her heart in her throat. Had Blackwood taken them? Had there been violence? The disorder suggested a thorough search, but she saw no blood, no signs of struggle beyond the obvious ransacking. Fletcher found the note first, pinned to the mantel with a knife. He pulled it free, his face going pale as he read. "What does it say?" Clara demanded. Fletcher's voice shook slightly as he read aloud. "Your meddling ends tonight. The women are safe, for now. If you want them to stay that way, you'll cease your investigation immediately and convince Miss Wyatt to sell her property. You have until tomorrow at noon to deliver her signed agreement to the land office. Failure to comply will result in consequences you won't enjoy. This is your only warning." He took them. Ethan's voice was hollow with fury and fear. He took Eleanor and all those women and children to use as leverage. "This is my fault," Clara breathed, the guilt crushing her. "I pushed for this investigation. I insisted we go after Sullivan, and now—" "This is Blackwood's fault," Fletcher interrupted firmly. "He's the one who chose to respond to a legitimate investigation with kidnapping and extortion. You didn't make him a monster, Clara. You just had the courage to confront him." But Clara barely heard him. Her mind was spiraling through possibilities, strategies, desperate plans. They couldn't give Blackwood what he wanted. Surrendering Eleanor's property wouldn't save anyone. Men like Blackwood, like Montgomery, they didn't honor deals with people they considered beneath them. He'd take the property and still hurt the hostages, if only to prove that defying him came with permanent consequences. "We have to find them," she said, forcing her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. "Before noon tomorrow. We find them, we free them, and then we end Blackwood for good." "Bah, that's insane," Fletcher protested. "We don't even know where he's keeping them. Blackwood owns 6 properties, hundreds of square miles of ranch land. They could be anywhere." "Then we narrow it down." Clara's mind was clearing now, fear crystallizing into cold determination. "Fletcher, you said Blackwood has a network of properties. Where would he take prisoners that he wanted to keep hidden? Somewhere remote? Somewhere his regular workers wouldn't stumble across them?" Fletcher thought for a moment. "There's an old line shack about 10 miles north of his main ranch house. Used to be a way station for cowboys moving cattle, but it's been abandoned for years. Remote, defensible, far enough from civilization that screams wouldn't carry." "Or there's the timber camp," Ethan added, his voice tight. "About 15 miles northwest. Blackwood keeps a crew there year-round, but they're loyal to him, well paid to ask no questions. If he wanted to hide people, it would be perfect. 2 locations, possibly more. Not enough time to search them all before the deadline, and splitting up would leave them vulnerable." Clara forced herself to think like Montgomery. like the kind of man who saw people as assets to be managed and threats to be eliminated. The line shack, she said with sudden certainty. He'd use the line shack. The timber camp has too many workers, too many potential witnesses, even if they're loyal. But an abandoned way station? That's isolated, controllable. He can keep a couple of men there as guards without drawing attention. That's a guess, Fletcher pointed out. It's an educated guess. And it's all we have. Clara turned to Ethan. Can you get us there? Tonight? In the dark? Across rough country? Ethan shook his head, but she could see him calculating routes, considering possibilities. It's dangerous. Horses could stumble, break a leg. We could get lost, end up going in circles. We don't have a choice. Every hour we wait is an hour Blackwood has to hurt those women, to move them somewhere else, to cover his tracks. Clara's voice was steady now, filled with the conviction of someone who'd made their decision and would see it through regardless of cost. I'm going, with or without you, but I'd rather have help. Ethan and Fletcher exchanged a long look, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Fletcher nodded. I'll stay here. See if I can find any clues Blackwood's men left behind about where they might have taken the hostages. Evidence we can use against him later, assuming we survive this. He gripped Ethan's shoulder. Bring them home safe. All of them. What about the sheriff? Clara asked. Shouldn't we tell Davis what's happening? Fletcher's expression darkened. Davis is a good man, but he's also cautious. He'll want evidence, warrants, proper procedure. By the time he organizes a legal response, Blackwood's deadline will have passed. No, we handle this ourselves, fast and quiet. Clara nodded, understanding the calculus. Sometimes justice required operating outside the law, at least temporarily. Montgomery had taught her that, ironically enough, taught her that legal systems could be manipulated, that power protected power, that real justice sometimes had to be seized rather than petitioned for. Ethan was already moving toward the door. I'll get the horses ready. Clara, you'll need warmer clothes and a weapon. Can you shoot? Well enough? Margaret had insisted they both learn after their parents died, a pragmatic measure that had seemed paranoid at the time but proved prescient now. Then grab the rifle from my study and meet me at the stable in 10 minutes. We leave as soon as you're ready. Clara ran back to Ethan's house, her mind already racing ahead to what they'd face at the line shack. Guards, certainly. Blackwood himself might even be there, though that seemed unlikely. Men like him didn't do their own dirty work. But whether he was present or not, they'd be walking into a trap of sorts, outnumbered and operating in unfamiliar territory. She changed quickly into the sturdiest clothes she had, then retrieved the rifle from Ethan's study. The weapon was well maintained, the action smooth when she checked it. She found ammunition in a drawer and pocketed what she could carry. Before leaving, Clara retrieved the ledger from its hiding place. She wrapped it carefully in oilcloth and tucked it into her saddlebag. If something happened to her tonight, if Blackwood or his men killed her, at least the evidence against Montgomery would survive. At least someone could use it to bring him down. Ethan had 2 horses saddled and ready when she reached the stable, both sturdy animals that looked capable of handling rough terrain in the dark. He handed her the reins to a gray mare with kind eyes. Her name's Ash. She's sure-footed and smart. Trust her to find her way even when you can't see the path. Ethan swung up onto his own mount, a rangy bay gelding. We'll take the ridge trail north. It's longer but safer in the dark. Should get us to the line shack around midnight if we push hard. They rode out of Silver Bend at a pace just short of reckless, the horses' hooves muffled by the dirt road. The moon was rising, nearly full, providing enough light to navigate by once they left the town behind. Clara focused on staying in the saddle, on following Ethan's lead through terrain that grew progressively rougher as they climbed into the hills. The rhythm of riding, the cold wind in her face, the ache in her legs from gripping the horse, it all combined to produce a strange clarity. Clara found herself thinking not just about the immediate danger ahead, but about the pattern of her life since Margaret's death. Running, hiding, surviving day to day with no thought beyond staying ahead of Montgomery's reach. But tonight she was riding toward danger instead of away from it. Tonight she was choosing to fight, to risk everything, to stand between innocent people and the kind of evil she'd been fleeing. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe she did have a savior complex. Or maybe she was just tired of being afraid. They rode in silence for over an hour, the landscape transforming around them from settled country to wild terrain. Scrub brush gave way to pine forest, gentle hills became rocky outcroppings, and the air grew thin and cold with altitude. Clara's hands were numb on the reins despite her gloves, her face stinging from the wind. Ethan finally called a halt in a small clearing sheltered by a ring of pines. "We're close," he said quietly, dismounting and helping Clara down from her horse. "Maybe half a mile from the line shack. We'll leave the horses here and go the rest on foot." Clara's legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, stiff from the hard ride. She forced herself to stretch, to work feeling back into her limbs, while Ethan secured the horses. "Here's the situation," Ethan said, pulling a small flask from his saddlebag and offering it to Clara. "The line shack sits in a small valley, single-room structure with maybe one window and the front door. If Blackwood's keeping prisoners there, he'll have guards, probably 2, maybe 3. They'll be watching the approaches, expecting trouble after leaving that note." Clara took a sip from the flask, the whiskey burning warmth down her throat. "So we can't just walk up and knock?" "No. We need to scout it first, see what we're dealing with, then formulate a plan." Ethan took the flask back, taking his own drink before tucking it away. "I know you want to rush in, save everyone immediately, but getting ourselves killed helps no one. We do this smart, understand?" "Understood." Clara checked her rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. "Lead the way." They moved through the forest like ghosts, Ethan's experience as a ranch hand evident in how silently he navigated the terrain. Clara did her best to match his stealth, grateful for the carpet of pine needles that muffled their footsteps. The temperature continued to drop as they moved deeper into the valley, Clara's breath misting in the air before her. The line shack appeared suddenly, a dark shape against the darker forest, yellow lamplight spilling from a single window. Ethan pulled Clara down behind a fallen log, both of them peering at the structure from their concealed position. 2 guards were immediately visible, both armed with rifles, stationed on either side of the door. They looked bored but alert, occasionally stamping their feet against the cold or shifting their weapons. Through the window, Clara could make out shapes moving inside. Multiple people, harder to count in the flickering lamplight. "I count at least 6 people inside," Ethan whispered. "Could be more. No way to know which ones are prisoners and which are guards without getting closer." "The 2 outside are definitely guards. Professional stance, good weapons, positioned for optimal sight lines." Clara studied the layout, her mind working through possibilities. "If we take them out quietly, we can get inside before anyone knows we're there." "Big if. These aren't amateur hired thugs. They know what they're doing." Clara's eyes narrowed as she continued to observe. One of the guards was younger, nervous, constantly fidgeting with his rifle. The other was older, more settled, but he had a flask he kept pulling from his coat, drinking on duty. Both were potential weaknesses to exploit. "The nervous one," she said, pointing carefully. "He's jumpy, reactive. A sudden noise would pull his attention, and the older one's been drinking. His reflexes will be slower." Ethan followed her gaze, assessment clear in his expression. "You think like a tactician. Where did you learn that?" "Survival's a good teacher." Clara didn't elaborate. "Can you circle around to the nervous one's side? Create a distraction, something that'll pull him away from the door?" "And you'll do what exactly?" "Handle the drunk one. Get inside, free the prisoners." Clara's voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. She'd never done anything like this. But Eleanor and those women and children were in there, terrified, depending on rescue that might not come if she and Ethan failed. "That's not a plan. That's barely an outline of a plan." But Ethan was already moving, checking his weapons, preparing. "Give me 5 minutes to get into position. When you hear an owl call, that'll be me. Make your move." He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Clara alone with her racing thoughts and the cold weight of the rifle in her hands. She watched the guards, timing their movements, looking for the perfect moment to strike. The drunk one took another pull from his flask, his attention drifting from the door to the forest around them. 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Then Clara heard it. The perfect imitation of an owl's call, coming from the direction Ethan had vanished. The nervous guard's head snapped toward the sound, his whole body tensing. "You hear that?" he hissed to his companion. The drunk guard barely looked up. Probably just an owl, kid. Relax. Owls don't sound like that. Something's out there. The nervous guard took a step toward the sound, then another, drawn by his own anxiety and the need to investigate. Clara watched him move further from the door, further from safety, right into whatever trap Ethan was setting. She moved. Silent as death, Clara crossed the open ground between her hiding spot and the line shack, the rifle raised and ready. The drunk guard sensed her at the last moment, his head turning, his mouth opening to shout a warning. Clara struck him with the rifle butt, a sharp blow to the temple that sent him crumpling without a sound. He hit the ground hard, unconscious, his flask rolling away into the darkness. She had seconds, maybe less, before the nervous guard realized something was wrong. Clara grabbed the door handle and pulled, ready to face whatever waited inside. The door swung open to reveal chaos. The scene inside the line shack crystallized in Clara's mind in an instant. Eleanor bound to a chair in the center of the room, 3 women huddled against the far wall with 4 children clutched against them, and 2 more guards who were already turning toward the door Clara had just burst through, their hands reaching for weapons. Clara didn't hesitate. She swung the rifle toward the nearest guard, a burly man with a scar cutting across his jaw. "Don't move. Hands where I can see them." The guard froze, calculation flickering across his features. The second guard, leaner and younger, had his pistol halfway out of its holster. Clara shifted her aim to him. "I said don't move. Next person who reaches for a weapon gets shot, and I promise you I won't miss at this range." Outside she heard a scuffle, Ethan dealing with the nervous guard. The sound seemed to make the decision for the scarred guard. His hand dropped toward his gun. Clara fired. The shot was deafening in the confined space, the bullet splintering the wooden post inches from the guard's head. Splinters flew, and the man jerked back, his hand freezing mid-motion. The children screamed, the women pressed themselves harder against the wall, and Eleanor's eyes went wide with shock and something that might have been hope. "The next one goes through your skull," Clara said, her voice cold and steady despite the way her heart threatened to hammer out of her chest. "Drop your weapons, now!" The scarred guard's jaw worked, fury and frustration warring in his expression, but he slowly pulled his pistol free and dropped it to the floor. The younger guard followed suit, both weapons clattering against the rough planks. "Kick them away. Good. Now on your knees, hands behind your heads." The door banged open behind Clara. She spun, rifle coming up, but it was Ethan dragging the unconscious nervous guard into the shack. Blood trickled from a cut on Ethan's forehead, and his knuckles were raw, but his eyes blazed with fierce satisfaction. "You started without me," he said, taking in the scene with a quick glance. "Couldn't wait. Seemed rude." Clara kept her rifle trained on the 2 guards while Ethan quickly bound them with rope from his pack, efficient and thorough. Only when both men were secured did Clara lower her weapon and rush to Eleanor. Eleanor's face was bruised, her lips split, and her wrists were raw from the ropes binding her to the chair. But her eyes were clear, burning with the same fire Clara had seen that first day in town. "Took you long enough," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse but steady as Clara worked the knots free. "I was beginning to think I'd have to rescue myself." "You probably could have," Clara replied, finally loosening the last rope. Eleanor stood shakily, rubbing circulation back into her wrists. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "Nothing that won't heal." Eleanor's gaze swept to the women and children against the wall. "But they terrified these poor souls half to death. Dragged us out of the house at gunpoint, threatened the children to make us cooperate." Ethan was already moving to the women, speaking in low, reassuring tones, checking for injuries. Clara could see the fear slowly ebbing from their faces as they realized rescue had actually come. "How many guards total?" Clara asked Eleanor. "The 5 you've dealt with, plus Blackwood himself was here earlier. He left about an hour ago, said he had other business to attend to." Eleanor's expression darkened. "But he'll be back, Clara. He told me as much. Said he'd return in the morning to collect my signed agreement or make an example of one of the children." The cold calculation in that statement made Clara's stomach turn. This was the reality of men like Blackwood, like Montgomery. They saw people as tools, as leverage, as expendable resources in their games of power and profit. "Then we need to move fast." Clara turned to survey their rescued prisoners. 3 women, all young, all showing signs of rough treatment, 4 children, the oldest maybe 7, the youngest barely more than a toddler. Getting them all back to Silver Bend, especially in the dark and cold, would be challenging. The horses, Ethan said, reading her thoughts. We've only got 2 horses, and they can't carry this many people. Blackwood's men must have transportation, Eleanor said. They brought us here in a wagon. It should be behind the shack. Ethan nodded and headed for the back door. Clara kept watch on the bound guards while Eleanor moved to comfort the women and children, her gentle words slowly coaxing them out of their terrified huddle. It's going to be all right now, Eleanor was saying, her voice soft but firm. You're safe. We're taking you home. One of the women, barely more than a girl, really, looked up at Eleanor with hollow eyes. He said if we ran, he'd find us. He said there was nowhere we could go that he wouldn't track us down. He lied. Clara spoke before she could stop herself, drawing the girl's attention. Men like Blackwood, they want you to believe they're all-powerful, that resistance is futile. But they're not gods. They're just men, and men can be stopped, can be beaten. How? The girl's voice was a whisper. He owns everything, controls everything. Not everything, not you, not anymore, and not Silver Bend, no matter what he thinks. Clara crouched down to the girl's level. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah Collins. Well, Sarah Collins, I'm Clara Hartley, and I promise you that Blackwood is going to pay for what he's done. To you, to all of you, to everyone he's ever hurt. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. Can you help me with that? Sarah's eyes searched Clara's face, looking for something. Certainty, maybe, or hope. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly. I can help. Ethan returned, breathing hard. Found the wagon. 2-horse team, still hitched. We can fit everyone if we're creative. Then let's move before Blackwood decides to come back early. Eleanor was already helping the women to their feet, organizing them with the practiced efficiency of someone used to managing crisis situations. They filed out into the cold night air, Clara bringing up the rear with her rifle still ready. The bound guards glared at her as she passed, the scarred one spitting at her feet. You're dead, he snarled. Blackwood's going to hunt you down and make you wish you'd never been born. All of you. Clara paused, looking down at him with an expression that made him flinch despite his bravado. Tell Blackwood something for me when he finds you. Tell him Clara Hartley says his reign of terror is over. Tell him I'm coming for him, and I'm bringing everything he's tried to hide into the light. She left him there, sputtering threats that grew fainter as she walked away. Outside, Ethan had the wagon ready, the women and children already climbing aboard with Eleanor's help. It was a tight fit, bodies pressed together for warmth and space, but they made it work. You and Eleanor take the wagon, Ethan said to Clara. I'll ride alongside on my horse. Keep watch. What about your other horse, the one I rode? She'll follow if we whistle for her. Smart animal. Ethan swung up into his saddle, his eyes scanning the dark forest around them. We need to move fast but careful. If Blackwood has other men in the area, we could run into trouble. Clara climbed onto the wagon seat next to Eleanor, taking up the reins. The horses responded to her gentle commands, pulling the wagon forward with the kind of steady reliability that came from good training and good treatment. They made their way back through the forest, following the same trail Ethan had led Clara up hours earlier. The journey felt longer now, weighted with the responsibility of their precious cargo and the knowledge that Blackwood's retribution could come at any moment. Eleanor was quiet beside her, lost in thought, or perhaps just exhausted. Clara glanced at her occasionally, noting the way Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, the way her eyes kept scanning the darkness as if expecting enemies to materialize from the shadows. You were incredibly brave back there, Eleanor said finally, her voice barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels. The way you walked in, took control, didn't hesitate. That's not the behavior of a seamstress or a cook. I did what needed to be done. Anyone would have. No, not anyone. Most people would have frozen, or negotiated, or tried to find a peaceful solution. You assessed the situation in seconds and acted decisively. That's the behavior of someone who's been in life or death situations before. Eleanor's eyes found Clara's in the darkness. Who are you really, Clara Hartley? Clara was saved from answering by a shout from behind them. She twisted in her seat to see torches in the distance, moving fast through the forest, Riders, multiple ones, and they were gaining ground. "Ethan!" Clara called out, but he'd already seen them. "Blackwood's men! He must have come back early, found the guards, and is coming after us." Ethan spurred his horse closer to the wagon. "We can't outrun them, not with this load. We need to find a defensive position." Clara's mind raced, calculating distances and options. They were still miles from Silver Bend, too far to reach safety before the riders caught them. And fighting in the open with women and children in the line of fire was suicide. "There," Eleanor pointed to a rocky outcropping about 100 yards ahead. "If we can reach those rocks, we can defend from higher ground." Clara snapped the reins, urging the horses to greater speed. The wagon lurched forward, bouncing over rough terrain, the women and children in back crying out at the rough handling. But speed was survival now, and comfort was a luxury they couldn't afford. The pursuing riders were close enough now that Clara could hear their shouts, could make out individual figures in the torchlight. 6, maybe 7 riders, all armed, all intent on recapturing their escaped prisoners. The wagon careened toward the rocks, Clara fighting to keep it upright as the wheels hit ruts and stones. 50 yards. 30. 20. The outcropping loomed before them, a jumble of boulders that would provide cover and elevated firing positions. They reached it with seconds to spare. Clara hauled on the reins, bringing the horses to a shuddering stop behind the largest boulder. Eleanor was already moving, helping the women and children out of the wagon and into the shelter of the rocks. "Get down and stay down," Eleanor commanded, her voice brooking no argument. "Clara, Ethan, and I will handle this." Clara grabbed her rifle and scrambled up onto a higher rock, finding a position with a clear view of their back trail. Ethan took up position to her right, his own rifle ready. Eleanor, to Clara's surprise, produced a small pistol from somewhere in her dress and positioned herself to defend the women and children directly. The riders thundered into view, torches blazing, weapons drawn. They pulled up about 50 yards out, just beyond easy rifle range, their horses dancing and snorting in the cold air. And at the front of the group, sitting astride a magnificent black stallion, was a man who could only be Frank Blackwood. He was older than Clara expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of face that might have been handsome before cruelty and greed twisted it into something harder. He wore expensive clothes, fine leather gloves, and carried himself with the arrogance of a man who'd never been told no. "Eleanor Wyatt," his voice carried clearly across the distance, cultured and cold. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Send out the women and children, sign over your property, and I'll let you and your friends leave with your lives." "Go to hell, Blackwood," Eleanor shouted back. "You're not getting your hands on those people or my land." Blackwood's smile was visible even from a distance, a thin, cruel expression. "Such spirit. I've always admired that about you, Eleanor. It's almost a shame to have to break it." His eyes swept the rocks, assessing their position. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. This standoff only ends one way." "Then you better hope you have enough ammunition," Ethan called out, "because we're not going down easy, and we'll take as many of you with us as we can." Blackwood's attention shifted to Ethan, recognition flickering across his features. "Ethan Westlake, still searching for your lost sister after all these years? Still chasing ghosts and shadows?" His laugh was genuinely amused. "You're more pathetic than I thought." Clara saw Ethan's whole body tense, saw his finger tighten on the trigger. She put a hand on his arm, holding him back from a shot he might regret. "You know where Anna is." Ethan's voice shook with barely controlled rage. "You've known all along. Tell me where she is, Blackwood. Tell me what you did with her." "I've done so many things over the years, acquired so many assets. You'll have to be more specific." Blackwood's smile widened. "Though if you surrender now, perhaps I'll be inclined to share some information. A trade. Your life and freedom for answers about your sister. Seems fair, doesn't it?" It was a lie, Clara knew. Blackwood would never honor such a bargain. He'd take Ethan prisoner, torture him for sport, and still never reveal the truth about Anna. Men like him didn't trade fairly. They manipulated, deceived, and destroyed. "Don't listen to him, Ethan," Clara said quietly. "He's baiting you, trying to make you do something stupid." "And who might you be?" Blackwood's attention swung to Clara, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "You're not from around here. Fresh face in Silver Bend. Let me guess, another of Eleanor's charity cases? Another broken woman seeking refuge?" Clara stood, making herself visible, meeting Blackwood's gaze across the distance. Some instinct told her this was important, this moment of confrontation, that Blackwood needed to see her, to understand that his enemies weren't just the usual frontier rabble, but someone who understood his game. "My name is Clara Hartley," she called out, her voice steady and strong. "And I'm here to tell you that your operation is finished. Your partnership with Reed Montgomery is finished. Everything you've built on the backs of desperate people is going to come crashing down." The effect of Montgomery's name was electric. Blackwood's smile vanished, replaced by something darker and more dangerous. His horse shifted nervously beneath him, responding to its rider's sudden tension. "How do you know that name?" Blackwood's voice had lost its cultured veneer, now raw and threatening. "Because I have proof of everything. Ledgers showing every transaction, every victim, every crime committed by your network. And if anything happens to me, if anything happens to any of these people, that evidence goes directly to federal marshals. Your empire burns, Blackwood, along with Montgomery's." It was a bluff, partially. The ledger was back in Silver Bend, hidden in Ethan's house. But Blackwood didn't know that, and the mere mention of documented evidence had clearly rattled him. Blackwood's hand moved to his gun. "You're lying. Montgomery would never be so careless as to leave evidence lying around." "He didn't leave it lying around. Someone close to him copied it. Someone who died trying to expose him." Clara's voice roughened with emotion despite her attempts to control it. "My sister gave her life to document his crimes. I won't let that sacrifice be for nothing." Understanding dawned on Blackwood's face, followed by something that might have been respect or might have been fear. "You're the one Montgomery's been hunting. The sister of that woman in Kansas City, the one who's been running for months." "I'm done running." Clara raised her rifle, sighting down the barrel at Blackwood's chest. "Your choice now is simple. Ride away, disband your operation, and disappear before the law catches up with you. Or push this confrontation and guarantee that the evidence I have gets released. Either way, your reign in Silver Bend is over." For a long moment, the tableau held, Clara and her allies among the rocks, Blackwood and his men poised for attack, the cold wind carrying the scent of gun oil and fear. Clara could feel Ethan beside her, ready to back whatever play she made. Could hear Eleanor's steady breathing, the soft whimpers of frightened children, the creak of leather as Blackwood's men shifted in their saddles. Then Blackwood laughed, a sound devoid of humor or warmth. "You think threatening me with exposure will make me retreat? Child, I've spent 15 years building this empire. I've bribed judges, bought sheriffs, intimidated witnesses, and eliminated threats far more dangerous than one woman with a stolen ledger." His hand was fully on his gun now. "You want a war? You've got one. And I promise you, when this is over, you'll beg me to kill you just to make the pain stop." He drew his weapon, the signal his men had been waiting for. 6 guns came up simultaneously, aimed at the rocks, at Clara's position. Clara fired first. Her shot took Blackwood's hat clean off his head, the bullet passing close enough that she saw him flinch. It wasn't a killing shot. She'd aimed high deliberately, giving him one last chance to back down. But it proved her skill, her willingness to follow through on her threats. Ethan's rifle barked a half-second later, his bullet kicking up dirt at the hooves of Blackwood's horse. The animal reared, nearly throwing its rider, and in the chaos that followed, Blackwood's men opened fire. Bullets ricocheted off stone, whined through the air, splintered rock into fragments that stung like wasps. Clara ducked down, levered another round into her rifle, and returned fire. She didn't aim to kill. Despite everything, she wasn't ready to cross that line, but she aimed close enough to make Blackwood's men think twice about pressing their attack. Ethan was less restrained. His shots were precise and purposeful, aimed at the riders who posed the greatest threat. Clara saw one man cry out and clutch his shoulder, saw another's horse go down with a bullet to the leg, throwing its rider hard. The firefight was brief but intense. Blackwood's men, for all their bravado, weren't professional soldiers. They were enforcers and thugs, used to intimidating unarmed victims, not fighting opponents who shot back with accuracy and determination. After the initial exchange, they began to pull back, seeking cover, their confidence shaken. Blackwood himself had retreated behind his men, his face contorted with rage. "Rush them!" he screamed at his employees. "They can't hit all of you. Take them down!" But his men had no appetite for a suicidal charge against entrenched enemies with good sightlines and better aim. They held their ground, firing sporadically, but none made the forward movement Blackwood demanded. Into this stalemate rode Sheriff Tom Davis, with a dozen armed men from Silver Bend at his back. The sheriff's arrival transformed the situation instantly. Blackwood's men, seeing themselves suddenly outnumbered and facing legal authority, began lowering their weapons. Blackwood himself sat rigid in his saddle, calculation flickering across his features as he assessed this new development. "Frank Blackwood," Davis's voice carried the weight of law and righteous anger. "You and your men are under arrest for kidnapping, extortion, assault, and about a dozen other charges I'll be happy to detail once we get you back to town." "On what evidence?" Blackwood demanded, but his bluster was failing, his certainty crumbling. The word of a woman with a vendetta? The accusations of rabble-rousers and troublemakers? "On the evidence of Judge Fletcher, who found correspondence in your own hand detailing your arrangements with James Sullivan to intercept private mail." Davis moved his horse forward, his deputies fanning out to surround Blackwood's men. "On the testimony of Sullivan himself, who Judge Fletcher convinced to provide a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. And on the evidence that Clara Hartley claims to possess regarding your partnership with a certain Reed Montgomery of Kansas City." Clara's heart soared. Fletcher had done it, had somehow gotten Sullivan to talk, to provide the leverage they needed to bring legal action against Blackwood. And now, with the sheriff here, with legal authority backing their accusations, Blackwood's power was broken. Blackwood's face went through a series of transformations: shock, rage, fear, and finally calculation. His hand moved slowly toward his gun, and Clara saw the moment he made his decision, saw him choose violence over surrender, death over imprisonment. "Blackwood, don't!" Davis's shout was cut off by the sharp crack of a gunshot, but it wasn't Blackwood who fired. It was Eleanor, her small pistol steady in her hands, smoke curling from the barrel. The shot took Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning him in his saddle, his own gun tumbling from his grip before he could bring it to bear. Blackwood screamed, clutching his wounded shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His horse reared again, and this time he couldn't maintain his seat. He fell hard, hitting the ground with an impact that drove the breath from his lungs. Davis's men swarmed forward, disarming and restraining Blackwood's employees before they could react. Within moments, the entire group was subdued, hands bound, weapons confiscated. Blackwood himself lay on the ground, groaning in pain, while Doc Brennan, who'd apparently ridden with the sheriff, worked to staunch the bleeding. Clara lowered her rifle, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Ethan climbed down from the rocks, his expression a mix of relief and lingering fury. Eleanor stood where she was, the pistol still in her hand, her face pale but determined. "He was going to shoot," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He was going to kill the sheriff and try to shoot his way out. I couldn't let that happen." "You did the right thing," Davis said, his tone gentle as he approached. "You stopped him from committing murder. No one's going to fault you for that." Clara made her way down from the rocks, her legs unsteady, the adrenaline of combat giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. She found herself standing over Blackwood, looking down at the man who'd terrorized this territory for 15 years, who'd partnered with Montgomery to destroy countless lives. Blackwood's eyes found hers, pain and hatred burning in their depths. "You think you've won," he gasped. "You think this changes anything. Montgomery will still come for you, will still hunt you down, and when he does, I'll be ready." Clara's voice was calm, certain. "Because I'm not the frightened woman who ran from Kansas City anymore. I'm not hiding, not running, not cowering in fear of men like you and him. I'm standing my ground, and I'm fighting back. And if Montgomery wants to come for me, let him come. I'll be waiting." She turned away from him, done wasting words on a defeated enemy. Eleanor was helping the women and children out of the rocks, reassuring them that the danger had passed. Ethan stood apart, his eyes distant, clearly wrestling with the fact that their victory had brought them no closer to finding his sister. Clara went to him, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll find her," she said quietly. "Blackwood's men, Sullivan, they'll talk eventually. Someone knows where Anna is, and we'll find them. And if she's dead? If she died years ago and I've been chasing a ghost?" The pain in Ethan's voice was raw, terrible to hear. "Then at least you'll know. At least you'll have answers." Clara squeezed his arm. But I don't think she's dead. Men like Blackwood, they keep valuable assets. If Anna was helping women escape, if she was a threat, he wouldn't have killed her. He would have kept her, used her, tried to break her spirit and turn her into another victim of his operation, which means there's still hope. Ethan looked at her, searching her face for false comfort, for lies meant to ease his pain. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. We keep searching then, together. Together, Clara agreed. Sheriff Davis approached, Doc Brennan at his side. We need to get everyone back to Silver Bend. The wounded need proper treatment, and these prisoners need to be locked up before Blackwood's friends start making noise about bail and lawyers. What about Montgomery? Clara asked. Blackwood said they were partners. If we can get Blackwood to testify. One step at a time, Davis said, but his expression was thoughtful. First we secure these convictions. Then we see what leverage we have to reach further east. But Clara, if you have evidence against this Montgomery fellow, real evidence that can stand up in court, you need to turn it over to federal authorities. This might be bigger than Silver Bend, bigger than anything I can handle. Clara nodded, not committing to anything. The ledger was her insurance policy, her weapon of last resort. She wasn't ready to give it up, not yet. Not until she was certain it would actually bring Montgomery down rather than just painting a target on her back. The journey back to Silver Bend was slow and careful. The wounded tended to, the prisoners secured, the rescued women and children wrapped in blankets and surrounded by protection. Clara rode in the wagon with Eleanor, both women too exhausted for conversation, content to simply exist in the aftermath of violence. Dawn was breaking as they reached the edge of town, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Silver Bend was waking, early risers emerging to start their days, and the sight of Sheriff Davis's procession brought them out in force. By the time they reached the jail, half the town had turned out to watch Blackwood and his men being led inside in chains. Frank Walsh pushed through the crowd to reach Clara as she climbed down from the wagon. Are you all right? We heard there was shooting, that Blackwood had taken hostages. We're fine, Frank, tired and bruised, but fine. Clara managed a weary smile. And Blackwood's finished, his operations exposed, his powers broken. Silver Bend is free of him. Frank's relief was palpable. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes bright with emotion. You did this. You and Ethan and Eleanor. You stood up when it mattered, fought when others would have cowered. This town owes you a debt it can never repay. No debts, Clara said firmly. We did what needed to be done. That's all. But as she looked around at the gathered crowd, at the relief and gratitude on their faces, at Eleanor being embraced by the women she'd rescued, at Ethan standing apart but no longer quite so alone, Clara felt something shift inside her. This was what Margaret had wanted. Not revenge, not punishment, but justice. Real, tangible justice that protected the weak and held the powerful accountable. This was what the ledger could accomplish if used properly, if wielded by people who cared more about doing right than settling scores. Judge Fletcher appeared at Clara's elbow, his expression grave but satisfied. We need to talk, he said quietly, about the evidence you mentioned, about Reed Montgomery and his network. Not now, Clara replied. Right now, I need sleep. We can talk about Montgomery and what comes next when I'm capable of thinking clearly. Fletcher nodded, understanding. But soon, Clara. If Montgomery is as dangerous as you've suggested, if he's part of an operation that spans from Kansas City to Silver Bend, then we need to act before he can regroup and retaliate. I know, and we will. Clara's eyes found Ethan in the crowd, saw him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. But first, we take care of our own. Make sure Eleanor's shelter is secure, that those women and children are safe. Make sure Blackwood's people are properly dealt with and that his victims get justice. Then we turn our attention east, to Montgomery, to the ledger, to the final confrontation Clara had been both running from and moving toward since the night she fled Kansas City. The crowd began to disperse as the immediate excitement faded. Eleanor was leading her rescued women toward the shelter, Doc Brennan attending to their various hurts. Sheriff Davis was organizing his deputies to process the prisoners and secure evidence. And Clara stood in the middle of Main Street, watching Silver Bend return to something approaching normal, and felt the weight of what came next pressing down on her. Ethan approached, his steps slow, his face showing the strain of the long night. You should rest, he said. "You look like you're about to collapse." "I feel like I'm about to collapse," Clara admitted. "But there's so much to do, so many loose ends." "Can wait a few hours." "Come on." Ethan took her arm, gently steering her toward his house. "You've saved the day, defeated the villain, freed the prisoners. You're allowed to sleep now." They walked in silence through the morning streets, both too tired for conversation. At the house, Ethan guided Clara to her attic room, standing in the doorway as she sank onto the bed. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. "What you did tonight, what you've done since coming to Silver Bend, I judged you wrong. Thought you were just another runner, another coward trying to disappear. But you're the bravest person I've met. Braver than me, that's for damn sure." Clara looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the respect that had replaced his earlier suspicion. "I'm not brave, Ethan. I'm just tired of being afraid. There's a difference." "Maybe. Or maybe being tired of fear is the first step to real courage." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "When we go after Montgomery, when you're ready to use that evidence you have, I meant what I said. You won't be alone. Whatever you need, however dangerous it gets, I'm with you." "Why?" The question escaped before Clara could stop it. "You don't owe me anything. You could walk away right now, focus on finding Anna, let me deal with my own demons." "Because your demons and mine are probably the same ones. Because Montgomery and Blackwood were partners, which means finding Anna might depend on bringing Montgomery down. And because—" Ethan stopped, shook his head. "Because in the short time you've been here, you've reminded me what it means to fight for something besides vengeance. To stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. I'd forgotten that. Anna would be disappointed that I'd forgotten." The emotion in his voice made Clara's throat tight. She wanted to say something profound, something that would acknowledge the shift in their relationship, the alliance that had formed from necessity and solidified into something approaching friendship. But exhaustion was pulling her under, making coherent thought impossible. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything, for giving me a place to stay, for helping tonight, for believing in me when you had every reason not to." Ethan nodded, backing toward the door. "Get some sleep, Clara. We'll figure out the rest when you wake up." He closed the door softly, leaving Clara alone in the pale morning light. She should change clothes, should pull the ledger from its hiding place and review her options, should plan her next moves in the chess game she was playing with Montgomery. But instead, she simply lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, and let sleep take her. Her last conscious thought was that for the first time since Margaret's death, she didn't feel like she was running anymore. Didn't feel like a victim waiting for the inevitable. She felt like a fighter, like someone who could win. And when she woke, she would start planning how to do exactly that. The war with Blackwood was over. The war with Montgomery was about to begin. But this time, Clara wouldn't be fleeing in the night, clutching stolen evidence and praying for survival. This time, she'd be walking into battle with allies at her back, with purpose in her heart, and with the absolute certainty that justice, real justice, was worth fighting for. Silver Bend had given her that, had given her a home, a purpose, people worth protecting, and she would repay that gift by ensuring that men like Montgomery and Blackwood could never threaten this town or any other ever again. The ledger would finally be used, the truth would finally be told, and Reed Montgomery would finally face the consequences of his crimes. Clara drifted into sleep with that thought, a small smile on her lips, and for once, her dreams were not of running and fear, but of standing firm and fighting back. The future was uncertain. The battle ahead would be dangerous. But for the first time in months, Clara felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. And in the quiet of her small room in the town that had become her unexpected refuge and her chosen battlefield, that hope was enough.